You lie back the weight of the day, pulling gently at your chest. Outside, maybe it's raining. Maybe it's too quiet. Maybe it's just you and the ceiling fan spinning like an old radar dish, sweeping slowly across the room. You breathe in, let it out, and something inside you listens not for footsteps in the hall or creaks in the pipes, but for something quieter, something older, because if you tilt your head just right, you'll hear it. A whisper from far away, a hum beneath the hum. That's the sea talking again. And the sea, oh the sea, never forgets. It remembers ships that set sail and never came home. It remembers sails cut down by sudden winds and holes torn open by the jagged teeth of unseen reefs. But it remembers more than tragedy. The ocean remembers secrets, those it swallowed, and those it gave back, warped and half alive. Ships with no names. Lifeboats with no oars. Frozen faces and open eyes. See beneath those black waves is a graveyard built on confusion. Some wrecks are known, mapped, studied, but others just drift in and out of existence like something dreaming with one eye open. There are boats out there that shouldn't be afloat. There are distress calls that shouldn't still be echoing. There are stories of vessels burning in the water where no ship ever sank. And more than once, a sailor has blinked into the fog and sworn he saw a figure on deck, one that vanished the second he looked again. These aren't just ghost stories. These are cold reports, transcripts, salvage records, first-hand accounts from men and women who never set foot on the ocean again. And in every one of them, the same feeling comes up, that the sea is not empty, that it watches, that it waits. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Not because anything's coming for you, but because these stories don't end. They just circle, like wreckage caught in a current spinning around the same few truths. We don't know what's down there, and we've never known what it wants. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And while you're here, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Some of you are probably already halfway to sleep. Others still wide awake, scrolling in the dark. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started on tonight's journey together. You're standing now at the edge of a rusted metal railing. Below you, the water stretches flat and black, moonless. The air smells like salt and iron. Far in the distance, something blinks once, then again, then not at all. The distress signal said nothing but "I die." No location, no storm. Just those two words and the ship. It was still warm when they boarded. You shuffle along the deck, your boots slipping a little on slick peeling paint. The salt air bites at your throat, heavy with a strange copper tang. The ship ahead is silent, too silent. It floats on a dead calm sea under a bleached out sky. No waves, no gulls, no wind. Just you, your crewmates, and the SS Ourang Medan, or what's left of it. They say the message came through clear at first, then garbled. Just a few taps of Morse code from a freighter that shouldn't have been in that part of the sea at all. The words repeated in desperate rhythm. All officers, including captain, dead. Possibly whole crew dead. A long pause. And then, "I die." That was it, and that was enough. The nearest ship, the Silver Star, altered course immediately. You were aboard her, sprinting to prep a rescue that felt like it was already too late. That transmission didn't sound like distress. It sounded like someone pressing their last breath into a wire. And now standing here, staring up at the rusty hull of the Ourang Medan, you feel that same breath in the air. Cold, damp, watching. The ladder clanks as you climb. The deck is empty. No signs of a struggle. No fire. No smoke. Just silence, and something worse than silence. A stillness so complete it's offensive. The kind of still that makes your skin crawl because it feels intentional. It's like the ship itself is holding its breath. And then you find the first body. He's lying face up in the middle of the gangway. Eyes wide-mouthed, frozen in a scream. His hands are raised like he was trying to push something away, something you still can't see. His skin is pale, almost bluish, like he's been dead for hours. But he's warm to the touch. You pull your hand away like it's been burned. The bridge is worse. Bodies everywhere. Slumped over control panels, collapsed in corners, arms twisted in impossible angles. Some are curled up like children hiding from lightning. Others are stiff mid-motion, like someone hit pause during a riot you never heard. No blood, no wounds, not even bruises. And the dog. You wish you hadn't seen the dog. It's lying near the radio room, teeth-bared eyes, locked on something that isn't there anymore. Whatever came for the crew, it came for everyone. Below deck, it doesn't get better. The engine room's intact. Nothing's exploded, no signs of flooding. The food stores are untouched. The crew's quarters are made, and the boiler is off. No signs of gas, no toxic smells, no failed machinery. But it's cold. Freezing, actually, which makes no sense in this part of the world. The tropical heat outside should have turned this whole space into a furnace. But your breath fogs up. Frost lines the walls. The hairs on your arms rise like they're remembering something your brain can't. You make the call to tow her. Maybe someone smarter can make sense of this horror. But as soon as the tow lines tighten, the ship starts to smoke. At first it's faint like steam rising from a manhole. Then it thickens. Black. Angry. Smelling of burning meat and something far worse. You don't have time to react before the explosion punches the air out of your lungs. The fireball shoots skyward. Metal shrieks. The Ourang Medan cracks open like a wound and begins to sink. No one even has time to scream. You're already in the lifeboat watching her go down. Watching her vanish into that same glassy water. No wreckage remains. No survivors. No trace. The report you file is short and strange. You're not allowed to say everything you saw. You write that the crew was dead, cause unknown. You write that the ship caught fire during salvage. You write that you're still hearing tapping sounds in your dreams. Slow, deliberate Morse code. Over and over. I die. Some say it was a chemical leak. Potassium cyanide, maybe, or smuggled nerve gas. Others insist it was something paranormal, a ghost ship in the truest sense. And some go even further. They whisper that the ship never existed at all. No registration, no port logs, nothing, except your logbook and the silver stars. Both say the same thing. You saw her, you boarded her, and you left her in flames. You try not to remember the faces, but they come back anyway. The crew, the captain, the radio operator, who never finished his call, and most of all, the last man, the one who managed to send the final message. You wonder what he saw in those last seconds. What filled his lungs just before the line went dead? Was it poison, terror, or something else? A presence? A shape? something that shouldn't be there but was. Historians still debate whether the Ourang Medan ever existed. Skeptics say it's an urban legend. Conspiracy theorists say the US or Dutch military was involved. Paranormal investigators claim it was a cursed vessel, a death ship. You don't claim anything. You just remember the frost that shouldn't have been there, the eyes that followed you from the darkness, the cold that came before the flame. And every now and then, when you're on watch in the middle of the night, scanning the horizon for lights, you hear it again, a faint series of clicks, and just before sleep pulls you under, you remember what it spells. The waves break in lazy, slow-motion curls against jagged cliffs. Fog hangs in the air like breath from something massive and unseen. You stand on the shoreline jacket zipped to your chin, watching the surf churn below. Just offshore, skeletal fragments of metal peek from the water, jagged and rusting, the bones of something that once floated. It's quiet here, not peaceful, just quiet, as if the sea is holding something back, something that almost made it. This is where the SS Valencia died, but she didn't die quietly, and she didn't die alone. The Valencia left San Francisco in January 1906, headed for Seattle. She wasn't new. She wasn't fast. She wasn't even particularly seaworthy, not for the savage, mountainous waters of the Pacific Northwest. But she'd done this route before, carrying a few dozen passengers. Most of them, ordinary people, workers, families, men in coats, and women with children, all seeking routine travel. They never reached Seattle. The weather turned foul fast. The Valencia veered off course in the fog, and darkness inching too close to the Vancouver Island coastline, a place mariners called the graveyard of the Pacific. You don't earn a name like that for no reason. Over 2,000 vessels have vanished here, dragged down by invisible rocks, unpredictable tides, and storms that feel personal. At midnight, the Valencia struck a reef. The iron hull screamed. The ship jolted sideways. Water rushed in. Passengers were thrown from their bunks. Crews scrambled for lifeboats. Chaos erupted, not like in movies, but in the sharp, panicked silence of people too shocked to scream. You can imagine them blinking into the cold, the rain soaking their nightclothes, clinging to the rail as the ship groaned beneath their feet. She was only 50 yards from shore, close enough to see the cliffs, close enough to see trees, but too far to reach. The rocks were sheer. The waves were relentless. The lifeboats didn't fare any better. Some flipped as they hit the water. Others were crushed against the ship's own hull. Still others disappeared into the storm, never to be seen again. For nearly 2 days, survivors clung to the wreck, huddled together on the deck, tied to the masts, watching the waves rise, waiting for rescue that didn't come. It wasn't for lack of trying. Local indigenous peoples and Canadian ships attempted to reach the wreck, but the conditions were impossible. From the shore, people could see survivors' men waving women holding children, but they couldn't get to them. It's hard to imagine that kind of helplessness. Seeing someone seconds from death and knowing there's nothing you can do. On January 24th, a wave finally did what time and panic had been working on. It broke the Valencia apart. The sea swallowed her. Screams were heard, then silence. 37 people survived. More than 100 died. No women, no children. But this isn't where the story ends. In fact, it's where it starts to become something else entirely, because the Valencia didn't disappear. In the weeks that followed, people reported seeing strange things. Lights on the water, A ship moving silently in the fog. A figure waving from the cliffs. Then came the lifeboats. One barnacle-covered and faded was discovered floating near Pachina Point. Inside were the skeletal remains of several men still sitting upright like they were waiting for instructions. The boat had been missing for 4 years. It looked like it had only just been launched. In 1933, 27 years after the sinking, another lifeboat was found in a sea cave. Perfectly preserved, tucked far inside the cliffs, inside ropes, oars, even a canvas tarp, all intact like they'd been carefully placed there. The cave, by the way, is almost impossible to reach. No boat could have floated into it, and no human could have carried a lifeboat up the cliff and down the narrow rocks to store it there. Then there were the people. Fishermen and hikers swore they saw women in white standing on the rocks. Children holding hands staring out to sea. Music echoing from nowhere. A ship, black and old, drifting through the fog, only to vanish the moment you looked directly at it. The Valencia became more than a wreck. She became a presence. In 2002, a recreational diver exploring near the site surfaced in a panic. He said he heard weeping through his dive mask, not the rushing of air, not bubbles, but actual weeping. Soft, slow, childlike. He never dived there again. Today, if you walk along the western shore of Vancouver Island, you might find a plaque. It marks the site. It honors the lost. But it doesn't explain the strange cold wind, the occasional bell you hear when there shouldn't be one, or the wet footprints that sometimes appear on the sand, leading inland and then just stopping. The most chilling thing, so many people saw it happen. The wreck didn't occur in some remote stretch of ocean. It happened in sight of help, in reach of rescue. Witnesses watched women cling to railings, then disappear beneath the waves, watched lifeboats flip in the surf, watched men try to swim and fail, and no one could stop it. That trauma carved a hole in the coastline, and the sea, it seems, remembers everything. Historians still debate whether the hauntings are real or the result of mass grief passed down in stories. But that doesn't explain the lifeboats. It doesn't explain the skeletal men found still sitting upright. It doesn't explain the fact that in more than one maritime log, a passing ship's crew reported a ghostly vessel on their radar, fitting the Valencia's shape exactly. Ghost stories tend to fade with time. This one never did. The Valencia isn't just a tragedy. She's a wound, and she's still bleeding. You've never felt silence quite like the Arctic's. It isn't just the absence of sound, it's a kind of pressure, like the world has gone still to listen for something it's afraid to hear. You stand on a ridge of pack ice, your breath fogging in the air, staring out over a sea that's half frozen and half mirage. In the distance, through the snow haze, you see her again. The SS Baychimo, a steel freighter rusted and skeletal drifting without purpose or crew. She's been out here for decades now, appearing and disappearing, never where she should be. And somehow, always just out of reach. She was built in 1914 in Sweden, and by the 1920s, she was hauling fur and cargo for the Hudson's Bay Company across the Canadian Arctic. A working ship, nothing special. She made her runs, took her beatings from the sea, came back again. But in 1931, the ice caught up to her. That October, she got trapped off the coast of Barrow, Alaska, immobilized in pack ice during a trading run. The crew, seasoned and tough, waited it out for days, then weeks. But the ice didn't break. It thickened, pressed, cracked hull plates, threatened to crush her like a toy. Eventually, the Hudson's Bay Company flew in a rescue team. Most of the crew were evacuated by plane, leaving a small party to watch over the ship in case the ice released her. For a few days, the weather held. They monitored, waited, then without warning, a blizzard hit. Visibility dropped to zero. Temperatures plunged. And when the storm cleared, the Baychimo was gone. They assumed she had sunk. The ice had crushed her and pulled her down into the black. They were wrong. A few days later, she was spotted 20 miles away, fully intact, drifting as if nothing had happened. No one had seen her move. No one could explain how a frozen ship trapped in solid ice had slipped free, traveled miles, and reappeared without a single crewman aboard. They tried to reach her again, but by then she'd drifted farther, and so began the mystery. Over the next 4 decades, the Baychimo would be seen again and again. Inuit hunters, cargo vessels, Arctic research teams all reported glimpses of the phantom freighter. Sometimes she was trapped in ice again, perfectly preserved. Other times, she was drifting slowly along the horizon, sails down, windows empty. Every time someone tried to board her, the weather turned. Storms would roll in from nowhere. Ice would suddenly crack. Fog would fall like a curtain. It was as if the Baychimo didn't want to be found. Or worse, she did want to be found, but only by someone she chose. In 1933, a group of Alaskan natives managed to board her. They described a ship that looked as if the crew had just stepped out. Tables were set. Boots lined up neatly by bunks. One lantern still held oil, but there was no crew. In 1939, a salvage team planned to recover her. They prepared extensively, bringing tugs and equipment. But when they arrived, she was gone again, vanished completely from her last known coordinates. Ice flows don't just move vessels of that size without leaving a trail. But the Baychimo had slipped away like a shadow through trees. Some say she was seen as late as 1969, drifting silently near Point Barrow. That's almost 40 years of uncrewed wandering. No power, no anchor, no one at the helm. Yet she never sank. In fact, she never even degraded the way you'd expect. Her hull rusted, yes. Her wood weathered. But she remained whole, unbroken, as if preserved by something more than cold. They started calling her the Arctic Ghost, and slowly the stories shifted. No longer just sightings. Now there were whispers. A trapper who followed her in 1953 claimed to have boarded the ship, but never came back. His sled dogs returned alone, barking furiously, frosted to the bone. They say they found scratches on the ice claw marks leading toward the ship, but never away. A pilot flying over the Beaufort Sea in 1962 reported seeing a vessel in motion with no sign of crew or propulsion. He circled back for a second pass. It was gone. And then came the Inuit legends. Some say the Baychimo is watched over by Sedna, the sea goddess of the Arctic, who cursed her to drift forever for carrying stolen furs taken without proper tribute. Others speak of the Baychimo as a spirit vessel, one that absorbed the will of its sailors and now wanders in search of something it lost. Historians still debate whether the sightings are all the same ship or a string of coincidences inflated by folklore. They point to the harsh Arctic weather, the ice's tendency to reveal and hide wrecks with shifting seasons, and the human desire to explain the inexplicable. But the logbooks don't lie. The dates, the coordinates, the photographs. She was seen again and again, and then she wasn't. By the early 2000s, she had gone quiet. No confirmed sightings in decades. Some believe she finally went under. Others think she's still out there drifting under gray skies waiting for her next visitor. You dream of her sometimes. Not vividly, more like a shape in the mist. You're walking across the frozen sea, hearing the creak of iron, feeling the snow crunch underfoot. She appears hulking, and still her name barely visible on the bow. You step aboard. It's warm inside, and someone's made tea. The sails hang limp in the windless sky. The hull drifts steadily over calm waters. No cries for help, no wreckage, no sign of distress. Just a schooner floating silently across the Atlantic, pristine and eerie. This is the scene burned into the memory of the sailors who found her in 1872. Her name, Mary Celeste. You hear it whispered, often in seafaring circles, like a caution, like a riddle. It's become shorthand for the unexplainable. But few people know just how chilling her story really is, or how many theories have tried and failed to explain what happened aboard her. The Mary Celeste was built in 1861 and originally named Amazon. She had a spotty record even before the mystery, a collision, a fire, a few captain turnovers. Ships can carry bad luck like a scent, and by the time she was renamed Mary Celeste, that scent had soaked deep into her timbers. Her final voyage began on November 7th, 1872, out of New York Harbor. On board were 7 crewmen, Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. They were headed for Genoa, Italy, carrying a cargo of 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, flammable, yes, but not inherently dangerous if stored properly. Captain Briggs was a respected sailor. Nothing about this trip should have gone wrong. And yet a month later, she was found drifting in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean by another ship, the Dei Gratia. The Mary Celeste was under partial sail. Her hull was perfectly intact. No distress flag had been raised. Her lifeboat was missing. When the crew of the Dei Gratia boarded her, they were puzzled. The cargo was mostly untouched. The ship's stores of food and water were plentiful. The crew's personal items were still in their quarters undisturbed. Captain Briggs's logbook remained with the last entry dated 10 days prior and giving no hint of trouble. The only things missing were the people and the clock. The ship's clock had been removed from the wall. So had the sextant and the navigation instruments. It suggested the crew had left deliberately, perhaps in an emergency. But if there had been a fire or an explosion, why was the ship unharmed? Why leave in a lifeboat in the middle of the ocean with no sign of imminent danger? One detail kept nagging at investigators. The ship's interior was damp and slightly disheveled. Hatches were open. A sword was found under the captain's bed, sheathed, but stained with what some thought was rust, others claimed was blood. A few of the alcohol barrels were found to be empty, but not enough to suggest an emergency. So what happened? Some say the crew drank the alcohol and mutinied. But none of the crew had records suggesting disorder or violence. And why abandon a perfectly functional ship? Others suggest a waterspout or rogue wave might have soaked the vessel and panicked the captain into abandoning ship temporarily. But if so, why didn't they return? Then, there's the theory that poisonous fumes from leaking alcohol barrels caused a hallucinogenic state, driving the crew to madness. That would explain the open hatches and sudden desertion, but not the lack of damage or signs of struggle. Still others propose piracy, alien abduction, even sea monsters. All fun to imagine, none supported by evidence. Historians still debate whether the Mary Celeste was a victim of rational bad luck or something stranger. But what haunts everyone who's studied her case is the atmosphere, the feeling that hangs around the story. The absence of violence, the intact ship, the untouched meals. It's like everyone simply stepped out. And then there's the lifeboat. It was never found. Think about that. A single small boat carrying 10 people vanishes into the most tracked and trafficked body of water in the world, and no one ever spots it again. You start to wonder about the last moments aboard. Did Captain Briggs order an evacuation, calmly thinking they'd return? Did something spook them? Something only they saw? What was the weather like that morning? Was there a strange light on the horizon? A shape in the water? In one speculative diary fragment, allegedly recovered decades later, though its authenticity is disputed, a crewman writes of a shimmer in the sea, like heat waves in the air, but coming from below. He describes a noise like a humming bell and a moment of shared panic. But the page ends abruptly, and no one can trace the document's origin. Still, there's something about the Mary Celeste that sticks to the mind. She's not like other ghost ships. She didn't burn. She didn't sink. She wasn't wrecked or left derelict by war or pirates. She's the maritime version of the locked room mystery. Everything in place, door locked from the inside, and no one left to tell the story. In later years, the ship was sold and resold her new owners, desperate to make her seaworthy again. But she never quite cooperated. On one voyage, she struck a reef. On another, the crew abandoned her for good. Eventually, she was intentionally wrecked off the coast of Haiti in an insurance fraud scheme, her final insult. You might think that's the end, but there have been stories. Sailors, mostly old ones, with weathered skin and eyes like sea glass, claim to have seen her silhouette in the fog. A schooner under partial sail, no lights, drifting fast and silent. One crew reportedly heard a child crying as she passed. They say the Mary Celeste still sails, looking for her people, waiting for someone to come back aboard and finish the story. And when you close your eyes tonight, if you hear the gentle flap of canvas in the breeze, don't be alarmed. It's just the sails and the empty deck beneath them. You'd think one ghost ship would be enough. One bizarre tale of a dead crew, a vanished cause, and a ship that self-destructed as soon as help arrived. But then you come across the story of the SS Ang Madan, and suddenly it all feels like déjà vu, with darker undertones and questions that get more unsettling the deeper you go. It starts the same way, a strange SOS drifting across the sea in Morse code, crackling through the static on a quiet day in 1947. All officers, including captain, dead. Possibly whole crew dead. That was the first part, eerily identical to the Ourang Medan's transmission a few years earlier. A long pause. Then a final tap, I die, and then radio silence. Only this time the details that followed came wrapped in secrecy. The ship was said to be of Dutch registry, like the Urang Madan, sailing somewhere in the Strait of Malacca. But there were no official shipping logs, no registration records, no port entries, nothing. Some ships are lost to the sea. Others seem designed to disappear. A merchant vessel in the area, never officially named in surviving records, received the SOS and tracked the location. When they arrived, the ship was drifting without anchor or motion, seemingly carried by a weak current. The hull bore no name. The decks were clean. The lifeboats were gone, but the cranes were locked in place, as if nothing had been lowered. Boarding crews found exactly what you'd expect if you've read the story of the Urang Madan. Bodies everywhere. No wounds. No blood. Just terrified faces frozen in place. arms raised, fingers clawed, some curled in corners like they died trying to hide. The expressions were, according to one report, as if they had seen something beyond comprehension. But this time, the horror wasn't just confined to the ship. According to unofficial testimonies, two of the boarding crewmen who returned to their own vessel afterward began vomiting, then shaking. Then one of them collapsed, eyes open and blood streaming from his nose. He died within minutes. No known cause, no injury. The second man survived, but was never the same. He refused to speak about what he'd seen and was later discharged from the merchant service entirely. He lived out his remaining years in isolation. When pressed by family, he would only say, "It wasn't just death on that ship. It was something waiting to be let out." The boarding party quickly departed. They planned to tow the ship for salvage, but just as they began to secure the lines, a sudden fire erupted mid-deck. No ignition source, no explosion. Just flame. Violent and fast. It spread across the deck in less than 30 seconds, and just like that, the entire ship was engulfed in black smoke. They cut the tow lines. The heat was too intense. Minutes later, the hull cracked, and the ship began to sink. No wreckage was recovered. You may be thinking, this sounds exactly like the Ourang Medan. Same message, same fate, same unnatural silence afterward. And you'd be right. Historians still debate whether the Ang Madan and the Urang Madan were the same ship, just retold through garbled documents and maritime folklore. But there's another possibility that they were part of something connected, a larger, darker pattern that never made it into the official record. Some believe these ships were part of post-Waratah experiments. The war had just ended. Chemical and biological weapons research, especially by Axis powers, was still being uncovered. What if these vessels were transporting something volatile, something experimental, something sentient? That's the theory, at least. The Project Chimera file, an alleged classified naval report that surfaced online decades later, contains references to a ship with an unregistered hull carrying biologically reactive cargo and declassified weaponized nerve agents. Most experts dismiss it as a hoax, but those who study lost ships really study them say the file lines up disturbingly well with what's been described aboard both the Ang Madan and the Urang Madan. There's another layer too, one that doesn't make it into many articles. The Ang Madan's final logbook, recovered briefly before the fire consumed the rest of the ship, had a final entry written in shaky, broken English. It read, "They are in the hold. We made mistake. No breath, no light, but they wait." Now, of course, the log is gone, destroyed in the fire. All that remains are second-hand accounts. But the phrase "they wait" has become a kind of eerie refrain among deep-sea explorers. Divers joke about it. "Be careful in the hold," they'll say. That's where they wait. Still, even if you discount the supernatural, the pattern is disturbing. Unregistered ships, coded names, dead crews with no visible cause, rapid combustion right before salvage, and no survivors except for maybe one man too frightened to speak. If these were just ghost stories, they'd be easier to live with. But they're not. They're filed in logs. They're recorded in shipping reports. They left real marks on real maps. And the ocean? The ocean doesn't lie. It just keeps secrets. You wonder, standing at the edge of another quiet dock, what else was lost out there? How many ships sailed into fog and never came out? How many sent that last desperate signal, "I die"? And what if they weren't just announcing death? What if they were warning someone, you step away from the railing. The sea behind you looks calm. Too calm. The sort of calm that makes your skin twitch. There's a reason sailors hate quiet water, because quiet means something's watching, and it might be waiting in the hold. You're standing in a museum now. It's quiet here too. Glass cases, soft lighting, the faint hum of air conditioning. But in one room, far at the back, behind a velvet rope, is a display that pulls you in without asking. It's filled with porcelain bowls, delicate, blue and white, beautiful, but cracked. Not broken from time, no. Broken from pressure that crushed wood and bone alike on a single horrifying night in 1822. This is the cargo of the Tek Sing, the Titanic of the East. Her story doesn't begin with mystery. It begins with greed, hope, and overconfidence. She was a Chinese junk massive for her time, over 1,000 tons and nearly 200 feet long. She carried nearly 1,600 people, onboard merchants, sailors' families, and a fortune's worth of porcelain and silk. They were heading south from Ximen to Batavia, modern-day Indonesia, across one of the most dangerous straits in the world. The Tek Sing sailed into the Gaspar Strait under the cover of night. Captain Io Tauco, likely trying to save time, decided to cut through unfamiliar waters instead of waiting for daylight. It was a deadly gamble. The reef struck without warning. A jolt, a groan, the splintering of wood beneath their feet. Screams rising in the dark. The ship took on water fast, and in the chaos, most passengers never made it out of their bunks. Those on deck were thrown into a black, unforgiving sea. The Tek Sing sank with horrifying speed. Nearly every soul on board perished. Over 1,400 people lost in a single night. It remains one of the deadliest maritime disasters in recorded history. But for a long time, no one outside the region even knew her name. She was forgotten, buried under coral and silt, swallowed by the sea. And then, in 1999, 177 years later, a German Marine salvor named Michael Hatcher found her, or rather, stumbled across her remains while searching for another wreck entirely. What he and his team pulled from the deep was nothing short of staggering more than 350,000 pieces of porcelain. Plates, bowls, vases, cups, many perfectly intact. Others shattered into beautiful chaos. But that wasn't all they found. Divers reported a strange feeling while working the site. Some said they felt watched. Others said they kept hearing tapping like fingers on metal coming from within the wreck. One diver claimed he saw shadows moving inside the ship's broken hull, even though no one else was nearby. At first, these stories were dismissed as diving paranoia, nitrogen narcosis maybe, stress. But they kept happening. Some divers returned to the surface in a panic, refusing to go back down. One described a moment where he swore he saw a small, pale hand pressed against the inside of a smashed porthole. Another came back up crying, saying he'd heard voices whispering numbers in Mandarin numbers that matched the tally of the dead. And then came the porcelain. It wasn't just valuable, it was cursed. Or so some believed. Collectors who bought items from the Tek Sing salvage reported strange events objects, moving shattering in the night, or emitting cold spots in otherwise warm homes. One dealer claimed a display of Tek Sing plates fell without cause in his showroom shards, forming a circle on the floor. Another said a bowl in her collection rang like a bell at 3:00 a.m. for 3 nights straight. Historians still debate whether the Tek Sing was overloaded. Was it greed that sank her, or a simple navigational error? But others wonder if the cargo itself played a role. Porcelain in Chinese culture is not just ceramic, it's spiritual. Many of the plates bore ancestral symbols, traditional blessings and inscriptions meant to ward off misfortune. When hundreds of these protective objects are buried underwater for nearly 2 centuries and then disturbed, what exactly are you waking up? Some believe the ship's name itself was a warning. Tek Sing means true star or trusty star, but it also sounds eerily close to words used in regional dialects for silent spirit or buried voice. Coincidence? Maybe. But once you've looked into enough shipwreck stories, you learn to stop believing in coincidence. There's a detail often left out of the official retellings. Hatcher's salvage crew noted that despite the vast number of porcelain pieces recovered, they found very few human remains. Barely a handful of bones. No mass grave. No skeletons still pinned under wood. It's as if the people just vanished. Or perhaps they were taken somewhere deeper. One diver, who later left salvage work, entirely described his final descent to the Tek Sing wreck. As he floated through the broken hull past stacks of shattered bowls, he said the water grew colder. Visibility shrank. His light flickered. Then he claimed he heard music. A slow, strange melody. Wind chimes underwater. He surfaced gasping and never dived again. The Tek Sing sits in the shadowy pantheon of ghost ships, not for drifting empty, but for the magnitude of lives lost and the eerie residue that lingers. She doesn't reappear on radar. She doesn't burn in the fog. She sleeps. But that sleep somehow feels restless, and perhaps when storms pass over her resting place and deep currents stir her broken hull, the sea remembers the screams of the passengers, remembers the babies in their mother's arms, remembers the porcelain prayers meant to protect them. Now they lie together scattered across the seafloor, thousands of tiny tombstones glimmering like starlight in the dark. The North Atlantic is a strange place, not just because of the cold or the fog or the feeling that the sea is always slightly annoyed at your presence, but because sometimes things drift where they shouldn't. Sometimes a ship appears on radar that wasn't there a second ago, and sometimes a ship vanishes without ever sinking. The MV Lyubov Orlova is one of those stories. She started out normally enough. Built in Yugoslavia in 1976, she was a Soviet luxury cruise ship, emphasis on luxury in the Soviet sense, which meant heavy steel shag carpet and deep red upholstery. For decades, she sailed through polar waters carrying scientists, tourists, and the occasional group of overeager penguin watchers. But by the early 2000s, her time had passed. She was aging rusty in places and no longer meeting safety standards. In 2010, she was seized in St. John's, Newfoundland, over unpaid debts. Her crew abandoned ship some hadn't been paid in months. And there she sat for nearly 2 years, tethered to the dock like an unwanted ghost of Soviet ambition, until one day she slipped away. In January 2013, the Lyubov Orlova was finally sold for scrap. She was hitched to a tugboat and sent on her final journey toward a shipbreaker's yard in the Dominican Republic. But almost immediately, things went wrong. Rough seas snapped the tow line. The tug couldn't recover her. The Lyubov Orlova, nearly 300 feet long, began drifting out into the open Atlantic. Alone, uncrewed, uncontrolled, a floating steel ghost. For a while, Canadian authorities tried to track her. They issued statements assured the public she wasn't a threat. She was expected to sink somewhere in international waters, or maybe run aground harmlessly. No one seemed too concerned, and then she disappeared. No distress beacon, No explosion. No radar signal. Just gone. But this is where things get weird. About a year later, tabloids and fringe maritime blogs lit up with a rumor the Lyubov Orlova was still afloat. And she wasn't empty. She was full of rats. Not just ordinary rats, the stories claimed. Starving feral cannibal rats. Generations of them. Rats that had eaten their dead, then turned on each other, creating the most nightmarish form of rodent society imaginable, a ship where the only law was hunger. The story made headlines. Ghost ship full of cannibal rats. Headed for Britain, screamed one article. Abandoned Soviet vessel could crash on Irish coast, said another. Maps were drawn. Theories were spun. Warnings were issued, and yet no ship appeared. The coastlines remained quiet. The rats, if they ever existed, never made landfall. And the Lyubov Orlova became one of the strangest maritime legends of the 21st century. But the truth is murkier and possibly darker. In February 2013, a U.S. National Geospatial Intelligence Agency satellite reportedly detected an object consistent with the Lyubov Orlova's dimensions off the coast of Ireland. A few days later, it vanished from radar again. One emergency beacon did activate briefly, but only for a few hours before cutting off. Some say it triggered from water exposure, suggesting the ship had partially sunk. Others say it was manually triggered, which is unsettling, because who would be there to do that? No official wreckage was ever found. No lifeboats washed ashore. No debris. Just speculation. And speculation, as you've noticed, is where things start to spiral. One theory is that the ship was salvaged in secret. Perhaps a rogue crew intercepted her and towed her to a hidden port for illegal scrapping. But this would require massive infrastructure and silence. Another theory is that she struck a deep-sea anomaly and sank without a trace. There are regions in the Atlantic where shipwrecks vanish completely, depths so vast that even submarines avoid them. Could she be lying there now? Rats and all perfectly preserved in the freezing dark? But then there's the theory that refuses to go away, that she's still out there, drifting, a steel ghost with broken windows, torn Soviet flags and decks ruled by a generation of creatures bred only for survival. A sailor aboard a fishing vessel near the Azores swears he saw her. Tall, silent, floating, half-submerged. He radioed it in, but by the time patrol arrived, the ship was gone. When asked what he saw, he said it was her. I recognized the hull. Something moved on deck. Something? He nodded. More than one. You try to picture it. A cold morning fog rolling across the water. A gray hulk emerging from the mist. And on deck movement. Not quite human. Not quite right. Shapes crawling over the railings, peering out of broken windows, following you as you pass. The kind of image that stays with you when the lights are off. Historians don't argue much about the Lyubov Orlova anymore. To them, she's either scrapped or resting on the ocean floor. But mariners still tell the story, especially on nights when the fog rolls in and you can't see more than 10 feet ahead. It's part warning, part ritual, because the Lyubov Orlova may be the first modern ghost ship, a real documented vessel that entered the digital age tracked by satellite, pinged by beacon, and still able to disappear without a trace. No war, no storm, no crew, just metal and mystery, and maybe rats, or maybe worse than rats, maybe something learned to steer. You stare out across a steel-gray sea, the wind slicing sharp against your cheeks. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a ship is missing. Not wrecked, not destroyed, just gone. No wreckage, no oil slick, no broken mast floating like a tombstone. And yet the crew never came home. This is the story of the SS Waratah, a ship so cursed, so utterly vanished, that even time seems to have forgotten it. They called her the Titanic of the Southern Seas, a grand name for a ship that never completed her second voyage. The Waratah was a passenger liner built in 1908 by the Blue Anchor Line. She was elegant, formidable, and unusually top-heavy due to a design meant to accommodate both passengers and cargo. Her maiden voyage from London to Australia went well enough, though there were whispers. Whispers from passengers who said she rolled too much in the swell, that she leaned oddly in calm water, that something about her felt off. Still, when she left Durban, South Africa, on July 26, 1909, with 201 souls, aboard mostly wealthy travelers and families, there was no reason to believe she wouldn't reach Cape Town safely. She never did. Somewhere between Durban and Cape Town, the Waratah simply disappeared. There was no distress signal, no lifeboats found, no trace of cargo, nothing. The last confirmed sighting came from the Clan McIntyre, another steamer on the same route. Her crew reported seeing the Waratah in the distance. She looked fine. Weather was fair. Then as night fell, she vanished over the horizon. And that was it. When the Waratah failed to arrive and Cape Town panic set in, search efforts launched immediately. Ships combed the coastline. Aircraft joined the hunt. Even psychic mediums were consulted, yes, seriously, but not even a single piece of driftwood turned up. She was just gone. It was as if the ocean had blinked and swallowed her whole. You walk along the cliffs outside East London, South Africa, where the sea hits the rocks with relentless fury. Some locals still say that on foggy mornings you can hear a ship's horn in the mist, one that never seems to get closer. They say a woman in white sometimes appears on the shoreline, staring out, holding a child's hand. Always silent. Always watching. And while ghost stories are easy to dismiss, what happened in the months and years that followed is harder to explain. In 1910, a ship's captain reported seeing a large liner adrift off the coast, badly listing to one side. As they approached, a dense fog rolled in, and when it cleared, the ship was gone. In 1925, a fisherman off the Transkei coast found a bottle washed ashore with a note inside. The paper was soaked but legible. It read, SS Waratah, engine trouble. Listing heavily. God help us. The handwriting matched one of the passengers, but no one could prove it wasn't a hoax. Then there was the lifeboat. In 1967, 58 years after the disappearance, a lifeboat with the Blue Anchor Line crest was discovered floating near the Agulhas bank. It was aged but intact and empty. No bones, no belongings, just faint scuff marks on the wood, like someone had kicked at it from the inside. Still, no one could definitively say it was from the Waratah. The theories range from the rational to the wild. Some say she capsized due to her top-heavy design and sank so fast no one had time to react. Others suggest a sudden freak wave, a phenomenon now known as a rogue wave, hit her broadside and took her under in seconds. Historians still debate whether she was seaworthy at all. One engineer claimed the Waratah was a floating coffin unfit for long voyages, and that officials had ignored safety concerns in favor of marketing a luxury liner. If true, it adds a tragic layer of human negligence to the mystery. But even that doesn't explain the complete lack of debris. No ship sinks without leaving something behind. Unless, of course, it didn't sink. Some maritime researchers argue she may have drifted helpless into the vast and empty South Indian Ocean, well-off known shipping routes. Perhaps her crew perished slowly day by day until the ship finally ran aground on a remote island or sank under her own weight, far from where anyone thought to look. But then there's the strange case of the Comet. In 1913, this German survey ship picked up a faint radio transmission off the coast of Madagascar. The call sign matched the Waratah's. It was brief, just a signal ping, but it originated from the open sea. No other ships were in the area. The transmission was never repeated, and no one ever found its source. Some say it was just atmospheric interference. Others believe it was a ghost transmission, like an echo caught in the sky. But to those who followed the Waratah's story, it felt like a final plea, a sound that traveled too far too late. You lean over the edge of the bluff, watching the waves below churn with hidden violence. It's strange, isn't it, that a ship that big, with over 200 people, could just vanish in a stretch of ocean not far from land, that no one heard a scream. No one saw a flare. No one found a child's toy floating in the surf. It's like the sea just erased her, and yet something lingers. Every so often, a freighter crew reports radar anomalies off the South African coast. A shape too large, too slow, moving against the current. They shine searchlights into the night and see only fog. But a few swear they saw a hull, blue and gold trim, the ghost of a flag, a ship trying still to finish her voyage. And if you listen closely, you might hear it too. A horn in the distance, a ship that never made it, calling for help no one can give. The ice cracks beneath your boots with a sound like old bones snapping. You pause, look up, and there it is, rising out of the snowdrift like something preserved in amber, a ship frozen in place. Masts tipped forward like they're bowing to time sail's tattered hull sealed inside a sarcophagus of ice. The nameplate is worn but legible. Octavius. No one speaks it aloud. Not here. Because this isn't just a ghost ship. It's a time capsule and a grave. The legend of the Octavius has been whispered for centuries. The earliest known version dates back to 1775. That year, a whaling ship known as the Herald was sailing west of Greenland when it spotted a drifting icebound vessel. The captain, curious but cautious, sent a boarding party. They found a 3-masted schooner locked in the ice. No movement, no signal, just silence. But it wasn't empty. Below deck in the captain's quarters, they found a man seated at his desk, head tilted down, pen in hand, frozen solid. A woman and child were on the bed, lying as if asleep. The rest of the crew, dead frozen in various positions throughout the ship. And here's where the story sharpens like a knife. The date on the last entry in the captain's log was 1762. 13 years before the ship was discovered, the Octavius had reportedly departed from England bound for the Orient. After delivering its cargo, the captain attempted to return via the Northwest Passage, a bold, almost foolish move at the time. Ice-choked, largely unmapped and brutal even during its safest months, the passage had claimed plenty of ships. But none like this. Somehow the Octavius had completed the journey, traveled the entire Arctic route, unmanned with a dead crew, and still managed to drift to the other side, a ghost ship sailing blind. That's the story, at least. But of course, things are more complicated. There are no surviving official records of the Octavius in maritime registries. No insurance claims, no shipyard blueprints, no final cargo manifests. Skeptics argue the tale is a seafarer's invention, a myth to pass long hours at sea. Yet, versions of the same story appear again and again. In an 1840 sailor's journal, a vessel named the Glaucus reports a frozen ship off Ellesmere Island interiors intact, all crew dead at their posts. In an 1897 newspaper article out of Nova Scotia, a ship was said to be discovered frozen near Baffin Bay, its wheel gripped by a skeletal hand. Different names, same bones, same fate. You step cautiously down the creaking stairs into the imagined belly of the Octavius. The wood is brittle, the air sharp and still. In your mind, you trace the footsteps of the boarding crew, finding corpses posed like actors' expressions, slack some peaceful, some frozen in fear. But one thing stays with you, the captain. Sitting upright, logbook open, mid-sentence. What was he writing? Was it a log of their slow death? Did he know they were lost? Did he record the moment hope slipped beneath the horizon? One rumored entry reads, "The cold came fast. Men grew quiet. Flames no longer warm us. I write to remember, though we are forgotten." Others say that final page was left blank, only the pen resting on it, and a single frost-covered fingerprint. Historians still debate whether the Octavius was a real ship or a borrowed ghost stitched together from multiple Arctic tragedies. It's true that the Northwest Passage has swallowed many crews. The Franklin expedition in the 1840s is a well-documented case. Over 120 men vanished, their ships entombed in ice, their fate unknown for decades. Human remains were found, some showing signs of cannibalism, starvation, cold, madness. But the Octavius is different because she made it. She went all the way. The passage was completed. The ship didn't wreck. She didn't burn. She didn't sink. She simply drifted into legend, delivering her frozen message like a letter from the dead. And that message is harder to read than you'd think. Some say the Octavius is a metaphor for our own blind ambition, that the captain in his hubris challenged nature and lost. Others see her as a ghostly warning that even when no one's left alive to steer, something else might guide a ship home. There's a darker theory, too, that the Octavius never sailed alone, that whatever crept onto her decks in the frozen dark didn't leave when the crew died, that some part of her, some memory, some intelligence remained, perhaps even kept her on course. Perhaps something ancient, born of cold and silence, used her as a vessel of its own, a story to sail from century to century. You stand now at the edge of a frozen world, trying to make sense of something senseless, a ship that arrived after death, a journey completed by ghosts, a logbook sealed by ice, and still something about her stirs the imagination, that anyone, anything could keep sailing forward long after life ends, long after the last light goes out. You imagine the Octavius drifting beneath the northern lights' colors, dancing on her frozen deck. No crew, no cries. Just wind whistling through rigging, and below the stillness of a captain with one last sentence frozen on his lips. He never finished it. Maybe you will. The river looks quiet. Now, smooth as glass, reflecting the moon like it's shy about shining too brightly. But this calm is a trick. Beneath it runs the Black Warrior River in Alabama, and this water, despite its sleepy name, holds a memory of flame. You stand at the bank's jacket, zipped, listening for something you can't quite explain. Then from somewhere deep in the fog, you hear it, music, faint, dreamy, a fiddle maybe, and a soft rising chorus of voices. The Eliza battle is about to pass by. She was a side-wheel paddle steamer, one of the finest river boats in the South. Elegant, fast, and popular, with wealthy passengers looking to travel in comfort. By 1858, she had become a symbol of river life. glamorous evenings, banquets on deck music drifting into the bayou air. But on the night of March 1st, that elegance caught fire. The Eliza battle was moving north from Mobile toward Columbus, with over 100 passengers and a heavy load of cotton stacked high on the decks. It was unseasonably cold, and some passengers wrapped themselves in blankets as they listened to the music played in the saloon. A string quartet candlelight, flickering across polished wood laughter, rising like steam. Around midnight, a gust of wind struck the river. A single lantern tipped. It fell into the cotton, and the fire once started moved like it had been waiting. Flames leapt from bale to bale, fueled by wind and dry air. Within minutes, the Eliza battle became a torch sailing through the night. Panic tore through the decks. The elegant music stopped. People screamed. Doors slammed. Some jumped into the river, hoping the freezing water was better than fire. Others ran for the sides and never made it. Of the 100 plus aboard, at least 33 died that night. Some bodies were never recovered. The current pulled them down and away. The fire burned the upper decks to cinders. The hull drifted glowing like an ember until it ran aground on a sandbar and finally extinguished itself. You'd think that would be the end. But then came the sightings. They started small fishermen, swearing they saw a red glow on the water. Then louder passengers on later steamboats claiming they passed a burning ship only to double back and find nothing. Even now, more than 160 years later, the stories haven't stopped. Locals say that on cold nights, especially in March, you can still see the Eliza battle on the water. No smoke, just fire, bright and silent. It drifts upstream against the current, an impossible feat, with music playing and passengers frozen in place. Some look joyful, as if unaware. Others, those seen closest to the railing, look directly at you. Some have even heard the music when there's no ship in sight. A violin, a woman's voice, then a splash, then nothing. A man once claimed he saw a figure on shore, dressed in old finery clothes, scorched but face serene. She said nothing, just turned, pointed to the river, and vanished into the reeds. Skeptics say it's a trick of mist and memory. The river plays with the light. People want to see ghosts, so they do. But those who've grown up near this water don't bother debating. They just nod when you mention her name. The Eliza battle, they say. She still runs that stretch. And the deeper you go into the story, the more the oddities stack up. The cotton bales were stacked unusually high for that voyage. Some say the owner demanded it, eager for profit. Others suggest sabotage. The fire moved too fast, too direct, too hungry. Some even believe one of the musicians aboard had a premonition, refused to board the ship at the last moment. His letter to a friend mentioned a dream of burning lace and a ship that sang as it died. That letter exists. You can see it in a small museum display in Demopolis. Historians still debate whether the ship's fire could have been contained had the crew acted faster. Some believe the crew was slow to respond, lulled by routine and cold. Others argue the Eliza battle was doomed by her own design, too much flammable material, too few escape routes. But those discussions feel hollow when compared to the sightings, because those haven't stopped. In 1965, a tugboat captain saw a fire ahead and turned hard to avoid it. He radioed for assistance. When help arrived, there was nothing on the water, just a faint layer of ash-like mist. In 1982, a teenager night fishing with his uncle said he saw a ball of fire moving against the wind downriver. He swears he could hear laughter. And in 2009, A kayaker camping near the bend woke up to the smell of smoke. No fire, no boat, just smoke, and the sound of music drifting through the trees. You sit by the river now, staring at the dark water, trying to picture it. The bow lit like a candle, the paddle wheel churning black smoke. A woman in a red dress clutching the rail. A violinist frozen in mid-bow. The cotton catching again and again every march, as if time has looped back on itself. The Eliza battle doesn't haunt like other ghost ships. She doesn't bring screams or cold spots or vanishing crews. She floats in plain sight, fully on fire, bold and impossible. A bright tragedy doomed to replay itself forever. And when the flames reach the sky, when the river glows red, when the notes of a waltz echo over the water, there's a moment where you feel like she sees you, and for that breath of time, you are part of her story. A witness, a guest, another name the river won't let go. The Arctic doesn't care about your maps. You can chart it, name every fjord trace, every channel on a satellite image, but it still shifts beneath your feet. Ice groans. Fog swallows everything, and if you're lucky, you get to leave. If not, will you become part of the landscape? A whisper caught in the snow. Like the Baychimo, yes, her again, because the Baychimo didn't just vanish and reappear once. She did it for decades. She became quite literally a myth in motion. And the more you try to understand her, the more she refuses to be understood. She's not a ghost ship frozen in time. She's a creature of habit one, with a route and a rhythm of her own. After that first abandonment in 1931, when her crew fled the ice and she slipped away during the storm, you'd think she'd vanish forever. But no. The Arctic gave her back, then took her again, and again, and again. In 1932, a group of Inuit hunters saw her near Wainwright, drifting slowly along the coast. They tried to board, hoping to salvage supplies. But the moment they got close, the ice cracked beneath their sleds. One man broke a leg. They backed off. In 1933, a dog sled team located her again. The cargo was still aboard furs, food, everything untouched. But when they tried to enter the ship's hold, they found the doors jammed. Frozen shut, maybe. But some claimed they heard movement inside. The Baychimo, they said, was not empty. That same year, a merchant ship captain spotted her during a clear sky afternoon. She was drifting parallel to his own vessel, no signs of damage. Curious, he tried to match speed and pull alongside her. But the Baychimo began to veer slowly, but deliberately, into thicker ice. Like she knew where she was going. He gave up the chase after 2 hours. The logbook reads, "The vessel appears to steer herself." That was the phrase that stuck. Appears to steer herself. It showed up again in 1935 when an Alaskan trapper tracked her inland through sea ice. He found her half frozen in a channel leaning to one side. When he climbed aboard, the decks creaked under his weight like they were exhaling. In the engine room, he swore he saw the dials move. There's no engine, he reminded himself. No crew, no power. So how did the dials twitch? He left before nightfall. Stories like this became common. So common, in fact, that the Baychimo became a local legend, not just a ship, but a kind of spirit. A wandering entity, half mechanical, half malevolent. Sailors spoke of her as if she were alive. She doesn't like company, they'd say. She knows when you're watching. She waits until the fog rolls in, then moves. Even the U.S. Coast Guard got involved. In 1939, they attempted to track and recover the Baychimo for good. A crew was sent with ice cutters and salvaging gear. They located her temporarily stuck in a shallow bay, and boarded her without resistance. They documented her condition, took photos, mapped the interior. But the next morning, she was gone. The Coast Guard vessel anchored half a mile away hadn't detected any movement. No creaks, no cracking ice, just disappearance. One officer, privately interviewed later, said it was like Baychimo had blinked out of existence. 1 minute she was there, he said. Next minute, white. Historians still debate whether the repeated sightings were real or simply misidentified. Icebergs, reflections, or fragments of her hull moved by ocean currents. But none of that explains the ship's uncanny ability to stay whole, to drift untethered for over 30 years without sinking. No major storms wrecked her. No salvage team ever successfully stripped her. She was found again in 1954, and again in 1962. The last confirmed sighting was in 1969, nearly 40 years after her abandonment. She was reported drifting near Barrow. Silent, still intact. After that, nothing. And yet locals still whisper her name. She appears in Inuit carvings, in coastal myths, in bedtime warnings told to children, if you see the Baychimo, don't board her. She carries no crew, but she watches. One woman, an elder from the Utqiagvik region, once said her grandfather boarded the ship as a child in the 1940s. He remembered the feel of the deck underfoot, the silence that pressed into your ears like snow. And he remembered something else. She said he found footprints, the woman said, but only one set, going in circles. The Baychimo didn't creak like a normal ship either. Her wood groaned like it was sighing. Her metal shuddered, not in wind, but in stillness. More than one person swore they saw light in her windows at night. Was it the moon? A trick of reflection? Or something older? You start to wonder if she's still out there, just below the edge of radar, hiding behind a curtain of ice fog, waiting for another winter to drift back into view. You imagine her now, her rusted hull, creaking masts, bent deck, coated in frost. No one at the wheel. No crew to shout orders. Just the slow sound of ice cracking beneath her like bones, shifting in a frozen grave. But she doesn't sink. That's the part that lingers. She never sinks, because maybe, just maybe, she isn't supposed to. You walk slowly along the shoreline boots, sinking into wet sand with every step. Ahead, the skeletal remains of a schooner lean drunkenly on the dunes. The paint is gone, stripped by salt and time. Only one name remains barely visible beneath the rot, Carol A. Deering. Her story is one of the most unsettling in maritime lore, not because of what was found aboard, but because of what wasn't. It was 1921, and the Carol A. Deering was a 5-masted cargo schooner built for workhorse duties, hauling coal and goods along the east coast of the United States. She wasn't glamorous, she wasn't fast, but she was reliable until she wasn't. Her final voyage began like any other. She departed from Norfolk, Virginia, en route to Rio de Janeiro with a load of coal. The trip down went smoothly, but the return north began to twist into something else. A different captain took over for the return WB, Wormel, an experienced mariner, but one who may have been in declining health. His crew included mostly foreign sailors, some recruited at the last minute. Some would later say that the crew didn't trust each other. Some would say they had reason not to. On January 28, 1921, the Carol A. Deering was sighted near Cape Lookout, North Carolina, by a lightship captain who noted something odd. A crewman, not the captain, hailed him through a megaphone, saying the ship had lost its anchors and needed to be reported to shore authorities. He also noted that the crewman looked unfamiliar, not someone he recognized from previous interactions with the vessel. Then the Deering sailed on. 2 days later, she ran aground on Diamond Shoals, a dangerous stretch off Cape Hatteras, known as the Graveyard of the Atlantic. The ship was discovered, perched awkwardly on a sandbar, sails set doors swinging open in the wind. When Coast Guard rescuers finally reached her, they found her completely abandoned, not damaged, not plundered, just empty. The galley appeared to have been in use moments before the crew vanished. Bread dough sat half-kneaded on the counter. A pot of stew had burned dry on the stove. The log books were gone. So were the ship's navigational tools. Lifeboats missing. Captain's quarters deserted, and no sign of struggle. There were no bloodstains, no signs of a mutiny. The only thing out of place was the eerie stillness. Like the ship had been frozen mid-thought, they searched the surrounding area for days. Nothing. Not a single crewman was ever found. No lifeboat washed ashore. No bodies. The ship had run aground in calm weather. It hadn't been storm-tossed. It hadn't capsized. It had simply arrived alone. The government opened an official investigation. They considered every possibility. Mutiny, maybe. Some reports suggested tensions between the captain and his crew. But if so, where did they go? Why leave a seaworthy vessel? Piracy. The Coast Guard found no signs of theft or damage, and pirates don't typically leave food on the stove. Natural disaster. No storms were recorded in the area. And if the crew had panicked and fled by lifeboat, why abandon everything mid-meal? Historians still debate whether the Carol A. Deering was lured into the shoals by a false lighthouse, a trick used by wreckers in earlier centuries to cause shipwrecks for plunder. But again, nothing was taken. Others point to less explainable theories: a freak seaquake, an attack by a rogue submarine, far-fetched. But this was just after World War I. Even the Bermuda Triangle gets pulled into the conversation, despite the location being well north of it. But here's what makes the Carol A. Deering truly haunting: it wasn't alone. In the months before and after her disappearance, at least 9 other vessels vanished in the same region, some under equally strange circumstances. One ship, the SS Hewitt, disappeared entirely. No wreckage, no distress call, no survivors. It left New York and never arrived in its Gulf destination. Some began calling it the Atlantic's other triangle. What links them all? Silence, vanishing, and an absence of evidence that feels deliberate. A crewman from a nearby ship later testified that his vessel had passed the Deering before she ran aground. He said he saw figures on the deck, but something about their movements unnerved him. Too slow, he said, like they didn't know how to sail. Some believe the ship had already been taken over. By what or whom? Well, no one knows. But that phrase, like they didn't know how to sail, sticks. You wonder about that stew, that half-made bread, those missing logbooks. What did the last entry say? Was it a standard weather report or something stranger? We are not alone. They are among us. Do not trust the fog. You'll never know. Today, what's left of the Carol A. Deering is long gone. The wreck was broken apart by storms, and time finished what the waves began. But sometimes beachcombers along the North Carolina coast say they find bits of red-painted wood matching the schooner's trim, or buttons from uniforms, or fragments of glass scorched as if by fire, though there's no record of any blaze aboard. And some say that on certain foggy mornings, you can hear the faint creak of a ship coming into shore. But no boat appears, just that sound, and the smell of burned stew. You look out at the sea now, imagining a 5-masted schooner drifting aimlessly into the shallows. No crew on deck, just sails snapping in the breeze, and a helm turning slowly, touched by no hand. The Carol A. Deering didn't explode. She didn't capsize. She didn't vanish into the deep. She made it all the way to shore, and still, not a single man came with her. You wouldn't think a ship could choose to stay behind. You wouldn't think steel and wood and rusted bolts could grow attached to a place. But the Baychimo wasn't just a ship anymore. Not after decades drifting the Arctic alone. Not after all those near captures, all those disappearing acts. The sea had taken her in, and the ice made her family. That's the only way to explain what happened next. Because even after repeated sightings, even after salvage crews and government officials tried again and again to bring her in, she always found her way back out. She didn't want to leave. And maybe she didn't have to. By the mid-20th century, she had become more legend than vessel. Children along the coast drew pictures of her in school big haunted eyes, for windows icicles dripping from ropes like claws. Elders told stories of how she'd drift up near the shore during certain full moons, then slip away before morning. Some even claimed the Baychimo responded to attention. An Inuit hunter in the early 1950s told of setting up camp not far from the shoreline. He'd seen her the day before, still like a statue in the distance. That night, he dreamed of creaking boards and low mechanical breathing. In the dream, he walked her decks, felt warmth in the captain's quarters. A red lantern burned in the window. When he woke up, she was gone, but her outline remained pressed into the ice like she'd been watching him too. Later that same decade, a Canadian Arctic patrol spotted her again, trapped near Point Hope. A salvage team was dispatched, hopeful that they could finally retrieve her before she escaped. The ice was stable, the weather held, and for once, everything lined up. They got within boarding distance, and then the blizzard rolled in, not a storm from the forecast, not one anyone saw coming. It arrived like a curtain fast and thick. Visibility dropped to zero. They lost sight of her. When it cleared, she was gone. No trail, no cracks, no path out. They checked their maps. They checked the coast. Nothing. It was like she'd stepped sideways out of time. The old-timers began saying what the young folks joked about the Baychimo had decided. She didn't want rescuing. She wasn't adrift. She was home. And that's when the sightings changed. She wasn't being seen near shipping lanes anymore. She wasn't sticking to the coast. She was deeper now, farther north, closer to where maps taper into guesses. One pilot flying over Beaufort Sea in the 1960s swore he saw her from the air trapped in an enormous ice field. He circled, took photographs, radioed her coordinates. But the next flyover, 2 days later, showed nothing but empty white. No tracks, no wreck. The photos never made it to the public, but years later, one surfaced, grainy faded, showing what looked like a cargo ship bow, embedded deep in glacial blue. No one could verify it. Historians still debate whether she finally went under sometime in the 70s. No confirmed sighting after 1969. But that doesn't explain the oil slick spotted by fishermen in 1983 that matched the kind of fuel she used, or the sonar ping in 1990, an object 260 feet long, unmoving just beneath the surface. No follow-up was made. Funding dried up. Interest waned. But the Baychimo stayed in whispers. A group of university students in 1995 launched a drone expedition in the northern reaches of Canada. They were testing experimental under-ice imaging. Their drone sent back brief, blurry footage of twisted steel and what appeared to be rigging caught in ice. Then the drone went silent. They lost it. But before it cut out, One audio technician said she heard something odd in the background. Not mechanical, not ice, a voice. She described it as low, almost metallic. A murmur, not quite language. She ran the file through filters amplifying the sound. What she heard chilled her, the repeated phrase, "Let me be." Of course, this was never confirmed. Dismissed as equipment interference, and yet the student dropped out the following semester and refused to speak to the press. That's the thing about the Baychimo. She's not content to be a mystery. She resists being found. Almost like she grew tired of people climbing aboard, rooting around trying to write her ending. She'd written her own, and she chose solitude. Now, if you hike out far enough onto the sea ice past, where the snow becomes razor hard and the air crackles in your lungs, you might catch a glimpse, just for a second, the curve of a hull, a crooked mast, a red door swinging gently in the wind. You'll blink and it'll be gone. But the footprints in the snow won't be yours alone. There will be others, pressed deep, wandering toward the ship, circling it, never returning. And if you listen closely, beneath the groan of ice and wind, you'll hear a creak that doesn't belong to the air. That's her, settling, breathing, waiting. She didn't break down. She didn't rot. She just stayed. Because some ghosts don't haunt places. They become them. You're standing on a jagged cliff somewhere in Scotland now, watching the North Sea churn like a pot too long left to boil. The wind cuts sideways, sharp as glass, and somewhere down below near the rocks, you see it, the skeletal remains of a ship that never made it home. The locals call her the Phantom of St. Abbs. But once upon a time, she had a real name, the SS Violet. She wasn't famous. She didn't carry royalty or treasure. She wasn't even particularly big. Just another 19th century steamship making her routine coastal trade between ports in northern England and southern Scotland. But in February of 1884 she vanished, and then just as quickly she came back, sort of. The Violet had set off from Hull, bound for Leith, carrying coal and a modest crew of 12. She was last seen rounding the Berwickshire coast near St. Abbs Head. Conditions were rough, but not unusual. Fog rolled in, the kind that swallows lighthouses whole. She never arrived. No distress signal, no wreckage, just nothing. For 2 days, officials waited. Then on the third morning, debris washed ashore, splintered wood, a single boot. The captain's logbook pages soaked through, but intact enough to read the final entry. Thick fog. Lights failing. Steering north by instinct now. Men uneasy. That's where it ended. A week passed, and then the sightings began. Villagers in St. Abbs reported seeing a ship offshore drifting unusually close to the rocks. No lights, no smoke, just floating. When they went to investigate, the sea was empty. Fishermen swore they passed her in the early morning fog, a steamship with black trim and a split funnel. One man said he waved and saw a man on deck waving back, but the man wasn't moving. His hand was frozen mid-air. And when the boat turned slightly with the current, the fishermen saw why. The figure had no face, just a void where eyes and mouth should have been. The story got out. A ghost ship off the Scottish coast. A mystery. Locals began avoiding that stretch of water. Sailors said they'd seen her at night lit by moonlight sails, impossibly full despite no wind. And always the same, a single man on deck. Unmoving, watching. Then came the salvage team. Drawn by rumors, a small crew set out in early March, hoping to find the wreck and claim rights to the coal cargo. They searched near Coldingham Bay, where wreckage had supposedly collected, and they found something. Buried under the surf at low tide, twisted steel beams, rivets, the forward mast, confirmed to match the Violet's dimensions. But here's where it turns. They also found handprints pressed into the rust, not etched, not painted, imprinted, as if someone had grabbed the steel as it was hardening. Impossible. More disturbing, one of the salvagers, a young diver named Callum, was pulled out mid-dive screaming. He claimed he'd seen someone staring at him from within the wreck, a face inches from his mask, not skeletal, not decomposed, just staring, and then gone. Callum refused to dive again. Over time, the sea covered the rest of the wreck. But the Violet wasn't finished. In 1931, a lighthouse keeper recorded in his log that a ship matching her profile had appeared again, this time much farther north, near the Orkney Islands. He reported it. No other ships were registered in the area. The fog was thick. The sea was flat. When asked to describe it, he simply wrote, "The ship had no wake, no noise." And I felt like it knew I was watching. Historians still debate the truth behind the Violet. Some say her wreckage drifted and was misidentified. Others believe the sightings were mass hysteria fueled by grief-storm season nerves and bad weather. But none of that explains the face in the water or the voice. Because in 1977, a marine biologist conducting sonar testing near Eyemouth picked up something strange. A faint repeating frequency, not quite Morse, not quite voice, just pulses. When translated to audible sound, it resembled low, rhythmic knocking. 4 beats, then silence. Knock, 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 knock. People started calling it the captain's knock. It's still occasionally picked up today, mostly during heavy fog. Always near the same stretch of sea, always in the off-season, and sometimes, rarely, but often enough, a ship's crew will radio in a sighting a single-masted steamer, drifting slowly against the current. They try to hail her. She never answers. You stare out across the waves, now imagining her. The Violet half there and half not. Her decks warped, but whole, a pale figure on the bow, always facing inland, like she's trying to find home. There's a theory that haunts you more than the ghost story, that she never sank. Not entirely, that the Violet was caught in some strange eddy of time and tide, a fold in space, that on fog-heavy nights she sails alongside us, not above or below, but beside, visible only when our world overlaps with hers. And maybe, just maybe, the man on deck sees us the same way, as ghosts, as shadows, as something he's been waiting for. And if you're quiet, and you listen, really listen, you might hear the knock. 4 soft taps against the hull of your thoughts, as if asking, "Are you there?" There's something about the Great Lakes. They look tame from a distance, flat expanses of fresh water ringed with trees towns, and the occasional sailboat lazily drifting under a summer sky. But if you've lived near them, you know better. You know they turn on you. Fast. You know Lake Superior especially doesn't give second chances. And you definitely know the name Edmund Fitzgerald. She was a giant 729 feet long, one of the largest freighters ever to ply the Great Lakes. Built in 1958, she was sleek, powerful, and proud. Locals called her the pride of the American side. School kids knew her name. Harbor towns cheered when she came through. She was a steel queen, hauling iron ore from Minnesota to steel mills farther east, until November 10th, 1975. That was the night she vanished. No icebergs, no pirates, no enemy torpedoes, just a freight ship, 29 men, and one hell of a storm. The Fitzgerald had left Superior, Wisconsin 2 days earlier, fully loaded and riding low in the water. Weather was already looking bad. Gale warnings were posted. Winds clocked in at 50 knots. Waves reached 25 feet and growing. But on the lakes, that's business as usual. She was joined by another vessel, the Arthur M. Anderson, and the two ships kept radio contact as they struggled through worsening conditions. Around 7:10 p.m., Captain Ernest McSorley radioed the Anderson to say, "We are holding our own." That was the last anyone ever heard from the Edmund Fitzgerald. She vanished from radar minutes later. No Mayday, no SOS, just nothing. The next morning, debris was found: life jackets, lifeboats, pieces of the hull. The Fitzgerald had gone down hard and fast, so fast, in fact, that none of the crew had time to send a signal. She broke in two, her bow and stern landing separately on the lake floor, 530 feet down. All 29 men aboard were lost. To this day, not a single body has ever been recovered, and that alone would be enough for legend. A great ship, gone in a blink in a storm that took no prisoners. But the Fitzgerald didn't just vanish. She stayed. People still see her. Fishermen swear they've spotted a freighter out on the water, cutting silently through the mist. Same dimensions, same profile, same lean as the Fitzgerald. But when they try to hail her, there's no response. And when the fog clears, there's no ship at all. In 1994, a solo sailor on Lake Superior said he saw her lights on the horizon, green and white, moving steadily. But his instruments showed no nearby vessels. He watched her for 15 minutes. Then the lights dipped below the waves, as if pulled down. He never forgot it. And then there's the music. People walking the shoreline near Whitefish Bay have reported hearing what they describe as low rhythmic hammering, like a ship being constructed underwater. Others say they hear a voice on the wind, a single verse from Gordon Lightfoot's haunting ballad. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead, and she really doesn't. Lake Superior is so cold that bodies rarely decompose. They sink, and they stay, preserved by the water's icy grip. But here's the part that's harder to explain. Divers who visited the wreck in 1989 described an eerie, almost intact pilot house. One of them, off the record, said he thought he saw a shadow behind the control panel. Not a body, just a shape. When they returned to the surface, their equipment glitched. Static on the radios. Batteries drained. Cameras wouldn't power on. They had to resurface twice before getting anything to work. One diver never returned. Not because he died, because he refused to go back. He claimed that while swimming alongside the hull, he heard banging 3 knocks repeating. Then silence. Then again. He turned and saw no one. Later, when he reviewed the audio, the knocking was gone. Erased. Like it didn't want to be remembered, he said. Historians still debate what brought the Fitzgerald down. Some say she took on water from damaged hatch covers. Others think she grounded on a shoal and never recovered. Some theorize rogue waves, a set of massive back-to-back swells that snapped her spine mid-voyage. But even now, no consensus exists. There are conspiracy theories, too, about overloaded cargo government silence military testing. But those fall away when you stand at the edge of Lake Superior and see that empty horizon. You can't fake that emptiness. You can't fake that silence, and yet the ship remains. Some say the Fitzgerald sails only during storms now, that her ghost emerges when the wind screams just right, that she's trying to finish her final trip. Others think her crew never left, that their spirits stayed aboard, unwilling to accept a fate that came so fast it didn't let them say goodbye. There's a buoy near the spot where she went down. It marks the location. It glows faintly at night, but mariners say it blinks oddly sometimes, not a steady pulse. More like code. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. A maritime distress signal. An SOS. You sit now near Whitefish Point, watching the fog roll in. The water is still. Unnaturally still. You listen, not for engines, but for footsteps, for whispers, for the sound of steel groaning beneath impossible weight. You swear you hear it. The wind carries it in pieces. A horn, a bang, a name, Fitzgerald. You'd think war would erase mystery, that the violence, the machinery, the bureaucracy of it would leave no room for ghosts. But some ships don't care what war they're in. They vanish just the same. And one of the strangest cases came not from the depths of the Atlantic or the frozen Arctic, but from right off the American coast during the deadliest conflict the world had ever seen. Her name was the USS Cyclops, and her disappearance still baffles historians even after a century. The Cyclops was a massive collier, a coal transport ship over 540 feet long, with a reinforced steel hull and the capacity to carry nearly 11,000 tons of fuel. She was part of a vital supply chain during World War I, keeping the U.S. Navy's warships running. She had no reputation for trouble, no mechanical issues, no superstitions tied to her name. Until March 1918, that's when she left Barbados, fully loaded with manganese ore, used to make steel for the war effort bound for Baltimore. On board were 306 people, crew officers, and a handful of passengers. She set sail on calm seas and under clear skies, and then she disappeared. No radio distress call, no debris, no lifeboats, just a blank spot in the timeline. One day, she was a dot on the naval chart, the next gone somewhere between Barbados and the Chesapeake Bay, a stretch of ocean not known for swallowing ships whole. The U.S. Navy launched an immediate investigation. They searched the waters, interviewed witnesses, retraced the Cyclops' route. Nothing. No sign of enemy submarines. No bad weather. No mutiny. Just absence. President Woodrow Wilson himself said, "Only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship." And that's when the theories began. The most logical explanation, of course, was structural failure. The Cyclops had a unique design, her hull supported by a single massive spine beam, making her vulnerable to cracking under stress. Maybe the weight of the manganese ore overloaded her. Maybe she buckled and went under instantly. But if so, where was the wreckage? Ships don't sink without a trace. Not entirely. Not in warm, shallow waters. So others started looking elsewhere for answers. Espionage. The ship's cargo was strategic. Some thought German spies had infiltrated the crew and sabotaged her. But no evidence was ever found. No confessions. No intercepted messages. Then came the whispers about her captain, George W. Worley. He was an odd man. Born Johann Friedrich Wichmann. In Germany, he changed his name and became a U.S. citizen. Some crew reportedly found him abrasive, erratic. Rumors floated that he was a German sympathizer. Was he capable of treason? Maybe. But was he capable of vanishing an entire ship? That's harder to believe. Still, the strange details kept stacking up. 2 of her sister ships, Proteus and Nereus, also vanished years later under similar circumstances. Both were transporting heavy ore through roughly the same region. Both vanished without a trace. No survivors. No wreckage. Identical disappearance. By then, people were calling it something else. The Bermuda Triangle. And the Cyclops. She became its first real victim. Historians still debate whether the triangle is real or just a coincidence of shipping routes and bad weather. But the numbers are odd. More than 1,000 ships and planes have reportedly vanished in the area between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Many of them in good weather. Many of them never found. And the Cyclops remains the largest U.S. Navy ship ever lost, without a trace. You try to imagine it now. A massive freighter plowing through glassy seas. Engines humming. Crew eating below decks. The sun hanging low. A few gulls in the distance, and then nothing. No sound. No flame. Just a pocket of silence that swallowed everything metal men, even memory. Some survivors, those who were transferred off the ship before the final voyage, later reported a strange atmosphere aboard. Tools disappearing. Doors slamming with no wind. One sailor claimed he'd heard the sound of knocking from within the hull at night. Another said the compass spun wildly during calm weather. There's no proof, of course, just impressions, just feelings. In 2018, exactly 100 years after her disappearance, a team of marine archaeologists attempted to locate the wreck using modern sonar and underwater drones. They scanned over 5,000 square miles of ocean floor. Nothing, just more sea, just more silence. You stand now near the port of Baltimore, staring out into the bay where the Cyclops should have returned. The water laps against the dock like it's breathing. You half expect to see a shadow rise from the deep, something hulking, and old lights dim crew silent. And sometimes, people do. In 1999, a sailor aboard a container vessel radioed in a collision warning. A large, slow-moving object had appeared on radar directly ahead, matching the dimensions of a collier. He turned hard to avoid it. When he looked out, there was nothing there. But the radar kept tracking the shape for another 5 minutes, and then it was gone. Historians can explain most things, but not this. Not a ship the size of a city block. Not 306 people vanished without a scream. Not the same route, same fate repeated with her sister ships. Not the phantom on radar. And certainly not the sense that out there somewhere, a giant ship still sails haunted by her own unfinished journey, the sea refusing to give up her story. Because some ships sink, but others just leave. The sea is cruel in a quiet way. It doesn't shout. It doesn't always rage. Sometimes it just waits, slow, patient, and merciless. That's how it was for the MV Joyita, a ship that didn't explode or break apart, a ship that didn't even sink. And yet when she was found, she was empty, abandoned mid-voyage, floating like a forgotten thought. Her story begins in the South Pacific, far from the stormy North Atlantic or the icy Arctic. Think turquoise, water coral reefs, swaying palms, and one of the eeriest maritime disappearances ever recorded. October 3rd, 1955. The MV Joyita, a 69-foot merchant vessel, left Apia Harbor in Samoa, bound for the Tokelau Islands. On board were 25 people, 16 crew, 9 passengers, including a government official, a doctor, and a family with children. They were carrying medical supplies, food trade goods. The weather forecast was good. It should have been a 2-day trip. The Joyita never arrived. 4 weeks passed. Search planes combed the ocean. Radio messages were unanswered. Families were left twisting in silence. Then on November 10th, a passing merchant ship spotted the Joyita, drifting 600 miles off course, listing heavily to one side. No distress flares. No response. Just drifting. When they boarded her, they found her strange. Very strange. She wasn't sunk. She wasn't even badly damaged. But she was deserted. Completely. There was no one on board. All 25 people were gone. The lifeboats were missing. So were the logbooks, the firearms, and most of the navigational gear. A doctor's bag sat open on the deck inside blood-stained bandages. The radio was tuned to the international distress frequency, but had been disabled by a loose wire. Watches on board had stopped at 10:25. Food was untouched. The engine was covered in rust. A tarp had been rigged as a sunshade, implying someone had been alive at least days after the initial incident. But they were no longer there, and they were never found. Not a single body, not a single lifeboat, just a ship half submerged, but still afloat, quietly waiting for someone to notice. Investigators were baffled. The Joyita had a cork-lined hull, meaning she was almost impossible to sink. Even if she took on water, she'd stay buoyant. So why abandon her? Why take lifeboats into open ocean when staying aboard gave a better chance of survival? Some theories came quickly. A leak in the cooling system had led to flooding in the engine room. The radio failed. Panic spread. Maybe the captain was injured, maybe even killed, and the crew lost confidence. In the heat and confusion, they may have decided to abandon ship believing she was going down. But that doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain the damaged radio wire deliberately removed. It doesn't explain the missing navigational gear carefully taken as if planned. It doesn't explain the blood or the silence. Some whispered of piracy. The South Pacific isn't always the paradise it pretends to be. Smuggling routes exist. Black market trades. Could pirates have boarded the Joyita killed, or abducted the passengers and left her adrift? Maybe, but there were no signs of struggle, no bullet holes, no plunder. Then came the darker theories, that the crew had discovered something they weren't meant to, a secret, a sighting, a message. That paranoia set in, that someone aboard snapped, or maybe that something came aboard. Fishermen later said they avoided the area where the Joyita was found. They spoke of a strange calm. Their birds didn't fly over it. Boats avoided it. Radios fizzed and died. One man called it dead water. And some have said, though, never in print, that if you pass through that stretch of ocean at the wrong time, you'll hear voices, not loud, just under the waves, talking softly, repeating the same thing over and over. We had to leave. We had to leave. Historians still debate whether the Joyita was just a tragic accident, a cascade of small failures, a captain too proud to call for help, a crew not trained for crisis. That theory ticks the right boxes. Logical. Clean. But logic doesn't clean blood off bandages. And it doesn't explain why no one came back. Here's something else. The ship's name, Joyita, means little jewel in Spanish. But after the incident, sailors in the region began calling her something else. La dama sin ojos, the lady without eyes. They said that from a distance she looked fine. Bright paint, sturdy mast, sails fluttering gently. But up close, her windows were shattered, and behind the glass, only blackness. No reflection, no light, just a void, like she was watching and blind. Today, the Joyita is long gone, salvaged, stripped, and eventually scrapped. But some say she still appears from time to time, not on radar, not on satellite, just appears, a ghost of a hull, a deck empty of life, a shape on the horizon that you see only once, and then it's gone. You imagine what the passengers must have felt in those final hours, sun-blazing water creeping in the radio dead. Maybe they argued, maybe they prayed, Maybe someone said, it's safer to stay. And maybe they were right, but they left anyway. And the sea never gave them back. You look now across a calm Pacific Bay. It's so quiet. And yet somewhere out there, something once drifted for a month with no one aboard. Not wrecked, not sunk. Just waiting, still floating, like a message in a bottle. And no one ever figured out what it meant. There's a different kind of silence in the desert. The kind that hums. The kind that feels like someone or something is listening. But what if I told you that silence followed a ship even into the sand? No, not a metaphor. A real ship, stranded, not in the sea, but in the heat-shimmering emptiness of Baja California. This is the story of the legendary ship of the desert, sometimes called the Phantom Galleon of the Colorado, a tale that shouldn't be real, but somehow refuses to die. It begins with a strange claim. In the 1800s, prospectors and settlers moving west through what is now the Imperial Valley of California reported something bizarre: the sight of a ship, an actual wooden-masted sailing ship, partially buried in the sand. Some swore it was a Spanish galleon, its stern rising above the dunes like a cathedral half sunk into the earth. Others said it was something older, or something that never belonged here at all. Now, logic says this is nonsense. There's no sea in the desert, no tide, no place for a ship to end up so far inland. But geography has a memory. Hundreds of years ago, the Gulf of California extended much farther north, and floods from the Colorado River occasionally created temporary inland seas. If a ship had been sailing those waters, especially in the 16th or 17th century, when maps were optimistic at best, it could have easily become stranded as the waters evaporated or shifted. And there are records. A 1615 Spanish document mentions a galleon lost during an exploratory expedition near Baja, believed to have sailed up a great inland bay. No name was given. No rescue was ever attempted. In 1774, Juan Bautista de Anza's expedition noted hearing strange tales from native tribes of a ghost canoe buried in the dunes filled with bones and silver. And then came the sightings. In 1870, a man named Charlie Klusker led an expedition into the desert near Salton Sink. He returned claiming to have found the wreck of a Viking-looking ship, timbers bleached white hull intact, half covered by shifting sands. He vowed to return and retrieve treasure said to be inside. He never did, and he never spoke of it again. Some say he vanished on a second trip. Others believe he sold the information to a railroad baron who had the wreck secretly dismantled and buried to keep it hidden from scavengers. But the desert doesn't hide its ghosts forever. In 1907, a newspaper report claimed a man found barnacle-encrusted planks sticking from the sand after a rare flood. He said they looked too large and curved to be from a wagon or house. When he returned a week later, the wind had swallowed them again. Then in the 1930s, a woman named Myrtle Botts reported that while hiking near Dos Palmas Springs, she and her husband saw what looked like a ship's bow rising from the desert floor. She described it in detail: curved wood, a blackened figurehead iron fittings along the edge. By the time she returned with a photographer, it was gone. Historians still debate whether these accounts were real, embellished, or outright hoaxes. Skeptics argue that no ship could survive centuries exposed to desert winds. And yet, no one can explain why so many people across decades, many with no knowledge of the legend, describe the same thing. And if it's all fantasy, why do so many maps from the 1800s feature a strange marking in the desert labeled galleon? Why did multiple native tribes pass down stories of a floating ghost trapped in the drylands, sometimes said to appear under the moon, sails flapping in wind that doesn't exist? There's an unsettling consistency in those stories, that the ship is never approached, that the moment someone gets too close, it fades, or the wind rises, the sand lifts, and the ship disappears behind a curtain of dust. Some believe it's a mirage, that the desert plays tricks bending light and memory into illusions. Others say it's a metaphor, a symbol of human foolishness, chasing treasure that isn't there, following ghosts instead of maps. But some think it's still out there. In 1966, a small earthquake shifted the dunes near the Salton Sea. For a brief period, a local pilot flying over the area claimed to have seen a crescent of dark wood peeking through the sand, shaped like the ribs of a ship. By the time anyone went to check, a sandstorm had erased all trace. And here's the strangest detail. According to legend, the ship's cargo wasn't gold. It was pearls. Thousands of them harvested from the Sea of Cortez, packed in barrels meant to be delivered to Spain. If true, it would make the ship one of the richest wrecks never found. But maybe that's the real trick of the desert. Not just to hide something, but to almost let you see it, to lead you far from water, from safety, from logic, until all that's left is heat silence and the outline of a ship that shouldn't be there. You squint now at the shimmering horizon. The sand glows like molten glass. A ripple of heat bends the distance, and for a moment, just one, you think you see it. A mast, a rail, a faded flag clinging to the last breath of a breeze. Then you blink, and it's gone. Or maybe it was never there. Maybe the ship sails only for the lost. Maybe it's waiting for you to follow. And maybe, if you do, you'll vanish into the dunes too, chasing a phantom over a sea that dried up long ago. Fog hangs low over the Thames, like a curtain that refuses to rise. You walk along the riverbank, boots splashing quietly against the puddled cobblestones, and the city breathes around you, old, layered, filled with 1,000 lifetimes of footsteps. Somewhere beyond the mist dock, cranes creak, and the water laps with lazy insistence. But beneath this calm lingers the memory of something darker. A ship that came to London and never truly left. The RMS Thames wasn't built for glory. She wasn't grand like the Titanic or mighty like a warship. She was a merchant steamer, plain and practical, tasked with hauling goods up and down the river from foreign ports. But in the winter of 1882, her final voyage left a mark not even the river could erase. She had departed from South America, her hold filled with crates of fruit sugar, and something else, something no one officially recorded. When she arrived in the port of London, she was already wrong. The crew were on edge. Some were sick. One had reportedly died en route and been buried at sea. The captain, well-respected, seasoned, was unusually silent during the docking. According to port authorities, he disembarked, signed the usual forms, then disappeared into the fog. He was never seen again. The rest of the crew offloaded cargo as normal, or tried to. But by the second day in port, the Thames was locked down. The ship's quartermaster was found unconscious below deck, muttering gibberish. A dock worker who entered the hold to inspect cargo came out pale, shaking, refusing to speak of what he'd seen. Another man simply vanished between shifts. His tools were found on the gangway. His hat floated in the river. The ship was quarantined, and then one night it drifted away. No steam, no crew, no tow, just slipped anchor and moved. When tugboats caught up with her, 2 miles downstream, The Thames was listing slightly. Lights were still burning inside, flickering weakly. The ship was boarded cautiously. They found it empty. No crew. No signs of a struggle. No bodies. Every hatch was locked from the inside. Food was half-eaten on the table. A teacup still warm. The captain's cabin reeked of ink and something sour. His logbook sat open, the last line scribbled hurriedly. The noise is inside now. It's inside. No one knew what that meant. And then there was the cargo. The manifest said fruit and sugar. But deeper in the hold, inspectors found a sealed crate unmarked. Inside animal bones, arranged carefully, deliberately, not dumped or packed for trade, laid out, as if for display. A ritual maybe, or a message. No explanation was ever given. The crate was removed, the records sealed, and the Thames was towed to a less trafficked dock. For years, she was used as a training vessel for engineers until more incidents began. Tools missing, lights flickering without power. One trainee claimed he heard voices in the engine room, low and humming, like chanting in a language he didn't recognize. Eventually, she was decommissioned, but not scrapped. Too many strange things happened when she was moved. A fire broke out on the dockyard during one attempt. Another time, the crane lifting her groaned and stopped mid-hoist. Mechanics swore the machinery was working. The ship just wouldn't lift. She was left to rot. Forgotten, almost. Because in 1939, at the start of World War II, a civilian vessel reported seeing a ghostly steamer drifting through the fog on the Thames. No lights, no sound. They radioed it in fearing a collision. But by the time officials arrived, there was nothing there. The strange part, the silhouette they described, matched the Thames exactly, except that she had been dismantled a year earlier. Officially, at least. But then who was steering her? Sightings continued sporadically. In 1957, a pair of teenagers fishing near the Isle of Dogs swore they saw a silent black ship appear and vanish in the mist. They claimed it let off no wake and that its windows glowed red. In 1971, a tugboat crew spotted what they thought was a stranded vessel near Greenwich. They turned to investigate, but as they approached, their instruments went haywire. Compasses spun, radios buzzed, and then the ship simply wasn't there anymore. The river, of course, offered no answers. It never does. Today, few remember the RMS Thames. There are no plaques, no museums, just whispers. Dockhands call her the Drifter. Some say she appears when the river is unusually quiet, like she's waiting for something, or someone. There's even an old superstition among river workers. If you see the Thames on a foggy morning, don't look her in the eye. Don't stare too long into the bridge. And never answer if she hails you, because if you do, you might hear something, a sound behind your thoughts. A noise that's no longer outside, a noise that's inside now. And it doesn't stop. It never stops. You walk away from the river, breath quickening. The fog brushes your shoulders like a hand you can't see. Somewhere behind you, a faint horn sounds old-fashioned, low, and distant. You don't turn around. You don't have to. You already know what's there. A ship, empty, moving without wind or tide, a forgotten name scrawled in river mist, and a cargo no one dares to claim. The South China Sea is warm, shallow, and full of noise waves slapping hulls, gulls screaming overhead, engines grinding, somewhere just beyond the horizon. But there's one place where the noise dies, a stretch of ocean between Malaysia and the Philippines, where radar goes blind and ships stop answering. It's here the Urang Madan made its final, horrifying transmission. The year was 1947 or maybe 1948. Records are fuzzy, conflicting. Even the name Urang Madan means man from Medan, a vague nod to its Indonesian origin, but little else is clear. She was a Dutch freighter sailing from an unknown port to an unknown destination, her manifest likely falsified or never recorded at all. And then, one day, radios across the Strait of Malacca crackled with a distress call. It was chilling. All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. There was a long pause. Then after a burst of static, a final transmission. I die. That was it. Silence. Another nearby ship, the Silver Star, picked up the call and responded. They found the Urang Madan drifting quiet with no visible damage. A boarding party was sent. What they found became legend. The crew was indeed dead. Everyone. Bodies were strewn across the decks. Eyes wide mouths, frozen in mid-scream. Arms reached upward as if fighting something invisible. Some were sprawled in unnatural positions, faces twisted with terror. Even the ship's dog was found dead teeth, bared in one final snarl. No signs of injury, no blood, no wounds, just death. The captain was found on the bridge, rigid and wide-eyed. The communications officer sat slumped by his radio hand, still on the key. Below deck, the engine room was a furnace. The temperature was described as nearly unbearable, though no fire was found. There was no explanation. The cargo hold was sealed tight, and the air smelled wrong, like burning chemicals and rotting fruit. The rescuers decided to tow the ship back to port, but as soon as they began, smoke erupted from the lower decks. The Urang Madan caught fire fast, violent, and furious. The boarding crew barely escaped before the ship exploded, splitting in half and sinking into the sea. Gone. With it went any chance of answers. To this day, no wreck has been recovered. No official logs. No solid proof the Urang Madan ever existed. And yet, too many reports, too many sources. Something happened out there. Historians, investigators, and conspiracy theorists have spent decades trying to untangle it. One theory suggests she was smuggling chemical weapons, possibly remnants of Japanese WW2 stockpiles, or nerve agents intended for illicit trade. A leak could have suffocated the crew in minutes, causing the frozen postures and lack of visible injury. Plausible. But it doesn't explain the radio operator's final words, or the expression on the faces. Some say carbon monoxide poisoning engine malfunction, leaking fumes through the ship. Others whisper of cyanide or nitroglycerin stored illegally below deck. But again, what ship carries such cargo without paperwork? Why the secrecy? Why the violent silence? And then there's the more unsettling theories, the paranormal. Some believe the ship encountered something unnatural, a sound, a light, a presence that overwhelmed the crew with terror. That they died not from poison or heat or gas, but from fear. Something so far outside the scope of human understanding that the mind shut down and the body followed. There's precedent, after all. In 1907, a Russian expedition to the Tunguska region reported a similar effect: sudden nausea, hallucinations, and eventually unconsciousness, all caused by what they described as a pillar of light rising from the forest. The Urang Medan's crew didn't survive long enough to describe anything, except for that last message. I die. It echoes, doesn't it? You imagine him, the radio man, sitting alone, smoke creeping under the door hands, trembling as he sends his final words. Not we die. Not the ship is lost. Just I die. Personal. Inevitable. Like he saw something and understood. And maybe you wonder why no wreck, Why no black box? No documents? No relatives claiming the lost? Some claim she was registered under a false flag. Others say she was never meant to be found. And still sailors report strange readings in the area. Radar glitches, unexplained interference. A freighter captain in 1972 claimed his ship passed through a fog bank near where the Urang Madan supposedly sank. The fog was metallic, he said. The compass spun. For 30 minutes, time seemed to stretch. When it cleared, they were 20 nautical miles off course. No damage, but every crew member reported vivid nightmares for weeks. Some dreamed of fire, some dreamed of screaming, and one dreamed of a man slumped at a radio eyes, black whispering, "I die." There are reports of a shape on sonar, a long, narrow object, beneath the sea, deeper than modern ships travel. But no salvage teams go after it. The water's too volatile, they say. Or maybe they don't want to find it. Some things want to stay lost. You picture her now, the Urang Madan, deep beneath the surface, her steel hull split like a rib cage. Her cargo still sealed her crew, still staring through the dark. And sometimes, just sometimes, you think you hear her again. A crackle of static, a voice over dead air. "I die." And in that moment, you're not alone. The sea is listening, and somewhere down there, so is she. The Black Sea is quiet tonight. Too quiet. You stand at the edge of the harbor in Varna, Bulgaria, the old concrete dock radiating chill up through your boots. The stars above shimmer in place, unmoving, while the waves below slap softly against the moored hulls. Somewhere out there under the inky water lies the story of the MV Demetrios. Though some say she never really sank, she simply faded. Most ghost ships are lost to storms or sabotage, but the Demetrios was lost to something stranger. Time decay, and possibly a lie. Her origin is simple enough. She was a Greek cargo ship built in the 1950s, working the Mediterranean routes, like many others, hauling goods, grain, maybe a little contraband here and there. Nothing remarkable. But by the 1980s, her condition was already deteriorating. She'd been flagged for safety violations, rusting through at the seams, and several ports refused her entry. Still, she made one last run. The official version says she was forced to dock near Githio, Greece, after engine trouble and financial problems. She was abandoned there in 1981, just left tied up the crew, gone. No salvage, no dismantling, just left. The ship sat in the shallow water, slowly decaying like a stranded animal too tired to move. And here's where it gets strange, because according to port records, she was stripped of her cargo and equipment in the months that followed. The ship was declared scrap, but local fishermen began reporting odd things. Lights aboard the ship at night, shadowy figures walking the deck, voices calling from the rusted bridge. Some of these reports were dismissed as kids sneaking aboard to explore. Others, more disturbing, couldn't be explained. One man swore he saw the Demetrios drifting out to sea one foggy morning, only to find her in the exact same spot later that day, tied exactly as before. Another swore he heard his own name shouted from the ship's hold as he passed by, so people stopped going near her. She became a landmark, a warning, and then she disappeared. Not sunk, not scrapped, gone. One morning in 1986, locals awoke to find the Demetrios wasn't at her mooring. Chains still dangled into the sea. The post was undisturbed. No drag marks, no hull debris, just absence. Search boats combed the coast. Nothing. They assumed she'd been broken apart in a storm, perhaps finally surrendering to rust and tide. But no storm had passed. The water had been calm. Divers were sent. Still no wreck, no oil slick, no trace. Then a month later, she was spotted again. In Turkey, not at sea, but grounded on a remote beach in Karaburnu-Rustiye. Than ever, but unmistakably whole. Locals claimed she'd washed ashore overnight. No one had seen her approach. No reports of her passing through the strait. She just appeared. Photos were taken, officials notified. But by the time a team was dispatched, she was gone, and not just from the beach. From memory, the Turkish Coastal Office had no official record. The fishermen who took the photos said the negatives had been ruined, scratched from the inside. The only remaining evidence was a torn newspaper clipping with a blurred image of a rusted hull half buried in sand. Some believe the ship is cursed. Others believe it never existed at all. But there's something worse than a cursed ship, a forgotten one, because over the next 2 decades, more sightings came in from Romania, from the Dardanelles, even as far south as Libya. Always the same, a rusted freighter, unmanned, appearing offshore for a few hours, then disappearing before help or investigation could arrive. The coordinates rarely matched. The ship was moving, without crew, without power, without logic, and always the same disturbing detail: her name had been scraped off the hull. Not faded, removed, deliberately. People began calling her the ship with no name. There's a theory whispered among sailors who spend too much time in the lower decks that the Demetrios wasn't a real ship at all, but a vessel for something else, that she carries not cargo but memory, that when you see her, it's not a haunting, it's a warning. You're standing at a threshold, and if you board her, you don't come back. There are no confirmed boardings, but there are stories. A pair of teenagers from Athens went missing in 1998 while camping along the coast. Their campsite was intact, tent-pitched fire burned down to coals. But their shoes were missing, and a trail of footprints led down to the water. The tide was low. A few scattered photos were found in their disposable camera, blurry shots of a ship offshore. In one frame, a figure stands at the rail. But zoom in, and the figure has no face, just shadow. In 2003, a Russian cargo crew reported nearly colliding with a drifting vessel off the Bulgarian coast. They hailed it. No response. Their radar showed nothing. But for 20 minutes, they saw her, with their own eyes, drifting alongside them, hull groaning rust, flaking like ash. And then she vanished in open water. Historians try to explain it away. Confused registries, recycled ship parts imagination. But sailors don't forget what they've seen. And when they tell you not to answer, if you hear your name whispered on the wind, they mean it. Because the Demetrios doesn't want you to find her. She wants you to follow, to wade into the surf eyes, fixed on her distant deck heart pounding. And if you do, you'll find yourself aboard, alone, lights flickering, deck shifting beneath your feet, and behind you, the sea rising, the beach gone. Only rusted steel and silence. Because the ship never truly wanted to dock. She just wanted company. The jungle always reclaims what doesn't belong. Vines split stone. Roots pry open metal. Time settles over everything like dust, like a verdict. But in the tangled swamps of the Amazon, one ship resisted. It didn't vanish. It waited half swallowed, half awake. Locals call it El Fantasma de los Ríos, the ghost of the rivers. Its real name, the SS Belen. She wasn't built for war or for passengers. She was a river freighter, squat and slow, meant for hauling rubber and hardwood through South America's winding veins in the early 1900s. Not glamorous, not famous, just useful. until she wasn't. The last confirmed record of the Belen came in 1924. She departed from Iquitos, Peru, with a skeleton crew and several tons of rubber bound for the coast. The jungle river was high, the currents cooperative. She should have made it to the Atlantic in less than 2 weeks. She didn't. No distress call, no wreckage, no storms. Just another ship that didn't arrive. And the Amazon, as it tends to do, offered no explanation. But the people who live along the river, they started seeing her. At first, it was just rumors. A shape in the mist. A long hull drifting silently past the banks, no engine sound. No crew, just a whisper of movement. Fishermen claimed she glided upstream against the current. Others reported hearing an engine at night, an old one, low and throaty, echoing through the trees, even when the river was still. Then, in 1937, a missionary recorded something strange in his journal. He was traveling upriver with supplies when his canoe crew grew agitated. They refused to paddle past a certain bend, said the water was cursed. He dismissed it until they pointed. There she was, a freighter, mid-river. No lights, no movement, just floating. He swore he saw someone on deck, pale, still holding a lantern that didn't glow. When he looked again, she was gone. Decades passed. The jungle closed in, but the Belen never quite left. In 1956, an aerial survey team captured a photograph of what appeared to be a rusted ship tangled in a swamp north of Manaus. Its profile matched that of early 20th century river freighters. The photo was dismissed as an abandoned barge. But when a follow-up team visited the coordinates a month later, no ship. Just trees! By the 1970s, the Belen had taken on mythic status. Children were warned not to follow strange lights along the water. Hunters whispered of a vessel that appeared during full moons, always silent, always upstream, as if pulled by some invisible hand. And always the same detail: her deck was dry, bone dry, which doesn't happen in the jungle. One explorer in 1981 claimed he finally boarded her, said he found her beached in a hidden cove surrounded by still water. Her paint was gone, her metal eaten by moss and rust. But the inside, preserved, he wrote, like she'd just left port. The crew quarters were intact, dishes still stacked, beds made. A journal open on the captain's desk, dated 3 days after the Belen supposedly disappeared. That journal page, blank, except for a smear of red ink shaped like a fingerprint. He took photos, none of them developed. Worse, he claimed he started hearing things after he left. The sound of a bell, footsteps on wood, his own name whispered through trees. He vanished 6 months later during a return expedition. His body was never found. Historians argue the Belen was either destroyed by tribal conflict or sank quietly in the uncharted channels of the Amazon. And sure, that's possible. The river hides a lot, but what doesn't make sense is how she keeps showing up. In 1999, a group of eco-tourists swore they saw her from their riverboat, a long vessel ahead in the mist, no markings, just floating. The guide dismissed it as an illusion. But one photo shows something more. A dark hull, a window, and inside, a face. No one can say whose. In 2008, during an unusually dry season, a research team discovered a partially buried structure in the river mud. They thought it was an old pier until they found bolts, decking, a rusted propeller. They reported it. When they returned, the river had risen, structure gone, but not forgotten. And the locals, they still see her, especially in the rainy season when the waters swell and the boundaries blur. They say the Belen is more than a ship now. She's part of the river, a memory it carries like sediment, a wound that never healed. One elder told a visiting journalist she didn't get lost, she was taken. The river wanted her, and now she belongs to it. The journalist asked what happened to the crew. The elder didn't answer. He just pointed at the trees and said, "Some of them still call out, and maybe that's what makes the Belen different. She's not a ghost ship that haunts the sea or the fog. She haunts the jungle, a place already thick with mystery and motion, a place where things move just out of sight, where voices come from nowhere, where paths change overnight. You picture her now low in the water vines curling around her hull, branches scraping her railings, silent, watching, waiting. And maybe she's not lost. Maybe she's waiting for someone to finish her journey, someone like you. So, next time you're drifting down a river too wide for comfort, and the mist creeps in low, and the trees lean in like they're listening, pay attention. Yes, if you hear a bell ring where there's no church, if you see a dry deck where there should be moss, if someone whispers your name from the reeds, don't answer. Don't look back, because the Belen is still out there, and the river remembers. You're on the deck of a modern cruise liner now, all glass and polished wood and overpriced cocktails. But out there beyond the infinity pool and the soft shuffle of slippers on teak, the sea stretches dark, endless, and far older than anything man has built on it. And below, deeper than the hull, is a mystery that refuses to sink. Because in 2007, something happened in the Indian Ocean that no one can explain. A cruise ship, perfectly intact, fully stocked, was found adrift, completely empty. Her name was the MV Joyful Spirit, a mid-size vessel registered in Panama, though owned by a shadowy tour company based in Malaysia. She wasn't one of the major players. No magazine spreads, no TV ads, just a quiet niche operation, private experiences, custom itineraries, spiritual retreats at sea. Spiritual retreats. That's how it was sold. She departed from Kochi, India on May 6th of 2007, bound for an 8-day voyage around the Maldives. On board, 54 passengers, 23 crew, and one guest speaker, a mystic known only as Ishan. No last name, no background, just flowing robes, a soft voice, and thousands of followers online. The joyful spirit left port with calm seas and high spirits. She never arrived at her destination. When the Coast Guard finally began searching after family members reported missed check-ins, they found her 6 days later drifting near the Laccadive Sea. No signs of distress, no storm damage. Engines powered down, navigation systems offline, anchor still up. They boarded expecting a medical emergency. What they found instead was nothing. No people, no animals, not even the ship's parrot, famously part of the dining room act. But everything else, perfectly in place. Buffet trays still full, glasses set on tables, bedding tucked tight in passenger cabins. The hot tubs were still warm. The speakers in the yoga studio were gently playing ambient music on a loop. And on the bridge, the captain's log was open. Its final entry read, "He has shown us the way. We go gladly." That's it. No signature, no coordinates, no explanation. Not a single passenger or crew member has ever been found. There were no distress calls. The life rafts were gone, but none of them were recovered. No emergency beacon was triggered, and the ship's GPS showed it had veered sharply off course on day 3, heading directly into open ocean away from all scheduled stops. Investigators were baffled. How could 77 people simply vanish? Some speculated mass suicide, but where were the bodies? Some proposed pirates, but nothing was taken, not even valuables from the ship's vaults. Others went deeper, much deeper. They focused on the recordings because the joyful spirit had security cameras, dozens. And when they were recovered, investigators found that the footage from May 6th to May 9 was intact. After that, it was gone, wiped clean. No technical explanation, no power surge, no physical tampering. The drives just stopped recording. But here's the thing. On May 9th, something changed. At 2:17 a.m., footage from the upper deck shows all passengers standing silently in a circle, in complete darkness, facing outward. No one moves. For 12 minutes. Then the camera glitches. And that's the last recorded image. The ship's official report lists the cause of disappearance as unknown, presumed mass evacuation. But there are rumors that one of the dive crew reported strange lights under the ship the day before, pulsing, coordinated, that the ship's compasses had started spinning slowly that morning, even while engines were off. There's more. Recovered from a crew member's phone, one that somehow stayed dry in a sealed locker, was a voice memo. Garbled, quiet, hard to hear, but one phrase stands out. He's not what he says he is. Referring to who? Ishan. No one ever confirmed who he really was. His passport turned out to be fake. His name didn't match any known records. And despite hundreds of photos of him online, no one could trace him prior to 2006. Some say he wasn't on board at all. Others think he never left, that he led them somewhere else, that he opened something. A few survivors, yes, there are always whispers, claim to have seen the ship weeks later still drifting further south than it should have been. One sailor described it as a ghost, wrapped in silver, with lights on in every window, but no movement on deck. Another swore he saw a figure standing at the stern, dressed in white, smiling. But when he blinked, the ship was gone. Historians still debate whether the joyful spirit was a cult in disguise, a mass delusion, a failed rescue attempt, but nothing quite fits because the sea was calm. The ship was intact, the systems were functioning, and yet no one was there. A cruise designed to surrender your ego to the waves ended with a ship full of food beds, music, and not a single soul. You stand now at a marina in Kochi where a small plaque honors the lost. It's inscribed with the ship's final log line. He has shown us the way. We go gladly. And if you ask around, some of the old dockhands still remember that voyage. They'll tell you the ship's crew was polite, the passengers quiet, Ishan charismatic, intense, but not unkind. Then they'll lower their voices and say, she came back once, docked under another name. Same hull, same smile painted on the bow, but no one was allowed to board. A cleanup crew entered. Only 2 returned. They never spoke again. The ship left port before dawn. Its registry erased the next week. And if you check the tracking buoys across the Indian Ocean sometimes, very rarely, you'll see a ping, a brief blip, a shadow of something moving where it shouldn't be, still playing soft music, still drifting under the stars, still waiting. The joyful spirit never wanted to be found. She wanted to be followed. The Adriatic Sea sits still tonight, moonlight rippling over its surface, like slow breathing. Somewhere offshore, not far from the coast of Croatia, lies an island so small it doesn't appear on most maps. Locals call it Otok Tishine Island of Silence. And they don't go there. But one ship did, just once. The MV Celestina, a private Italian research vessel, disappeared near that island in 1973. Her mission, to collect seismic readings and oceanographic data from a series of shallow underwater trenches. She carried a small crew, 12 scientists, 1 civilian journalist, and a hired sailor named Luca, who had spent his life navigating the Mediterranean. The Celestina was well equipped. She had modern radio sonar and a backup power supply. She also had a routine. Depart from Trieste, gather readings, over 3 days return to port. Simple, but the Celestina never returned. Her last transmission was received at 2:08 a.m. on June 19th. Just 3 words. "We found it." Then silence. The Coast Guard launched a search at dawn. They found the Celestina drifting gently toward the island, intact engines idling. She wasn't run aground. She wasn't damaged. The anchor was still up. And when they boarded her, she was empty. No blood. No signs of struggle. Food was still on the table. Coffee sat cooling in a cup beside an open journal. Instruments were humming. Lights flickered. The onboard cat, Nino, was curled asleep in a supply locker, hungry but otherwise unharmed. But the people, gone, all 13. The Coast Guard searched the surrounding waters. They searched the island. It was less than a mile wide, more rock than land, with no buildings, no trees, and nothing living except for a few birds and lizards. No signs of footprints, no burned fires, no messages, just stillness. The only thing unusual was a wide circle of blackened earth on the island's northern edge, charred down to stone. But no one could explain it. No lightning strike had been reported. No storm had passed, and the circle was cold. No heat, no smoke, just black. The recovered journal from the Celestina's lead scientist, Dr. Paolo Greco, offered only fragments of explanation. He'd written about unusual sonar readings, an echo that's not an echo, he called it. Something deep and oddly symmetrical. Then on the final page, "The water is whispering now. Even Luca hears it. We've drawn too close. One more pass, then we go." The sentence trailed off. Historians dismissed the event as a tragic accident. Some believed the crew may have drowned after a mass panic or mechanical failure. But this didn't match the facts. The ship was fully operational. There were no storm conditions. And if they'd gone into the sea, why hadn't anyone called for help? More unsettling, the cat. He was calm. And cats know things. In the years that followed, the island was largely ignored. Sailors avoided it. Locals stopped speaking about it altogether. A few who tried to visit said their compasses spun wildly near its shores. One diver, exploring the trench near its base in the 1980s, said he heard music underwater, a lullaby. He surfaced early shaking. 2 weeks later, he left his job. Wouldn't say why. Then came the French expedition in 1992. A privately funded group of oceanographers decided to follow the Celestina's original route. They made their base near the same trench. Their reports filed each night were filled with excitement. Strange magnetic anomalies, pressure changes without weather interference. They suspected geothermal vents until day 3. Their final log entry was a brief audio note recording increased seismic resonance. Structure beneath island may not be natural. Dr. Delphine says she hears voices again. End of transmission. The ship was recovered a week later empty. Same condition, same cat. Yes, somehow Nino the cat was there, older, thinner, but unmistakably the same, identified by his unusual black paw and a small scar on his left ear. DNA testing confirmed the match. How he got aboard the second ship remains unknown. By then, locals had a name for the trench. They called it the Mouth, and they stopped going near it entirely. They say the sea near the island has a pulse, a thump, that you can't hear but feel in your bones. Divers say, the deeper you go, the quieter the world becomes. Sound just fades. One said it was like floating through a vacuum. He described seeing shapes below geometric patterns in the rock, not natural. Then his air tank malfunctioned. He made it back. His partner didn't. There's a theory that the trench hides something, an ancient structure, a chamber, maybe even a vessel of some kind. Not a ship, but a place, a door. And that when ships pass too close, they don't vanish. They dock somewhere else. One sailor claims to have seen the Celestina again in 2006. Said she was visible for only a moment near the horizon, moving slowly lit with a strange yellow glow. No one was on deck. But the cat was there, perched at the bow, watching. That's the part that lingers, isn't it? The familiarity, the repetition. Like something is trying again and again to send the same message, to play the same scene until someone understands it or answers. You stand now near the edge of the island rocks, crunching under your feet. The sea is calm, but your hands are shaking. You hear nothing, but somehow your ears feel full. Like the water is humming just beneath the threshold of sound. You see the burn mark on the stone. You don't step into it. You back away. Because maybe the ships weren't lost. Maybe they arrived. And maybe that whisper you can't quite make out is calling your name. There are places on Earth where nothing seems to work quite right. No matter how advanced your ship is, how clear the weather, or how steady the course. And among these cursed coordinates, one patch of ocean holds its own sinister reputation. Not the Bermuda Triangle, not the Devil's Sea. No, this one hides beneath colder skies and blacker waves. It's called the Sable Vortex, and at the heart of it lies the wreck of the SS Waratah, a tragedy so haunting it left behind not just debris, but faces. The Watertown was a steamship. Early 1920s, American. She was built for transporting crude oil and chemicals, nothing fancy, just a solid workhorse of a freighter. On one voyage, she departed from the Panama Canal and made her way up the East Coast toward New York. The weather held. The crew was experienced. Everything was ordinary until they hit the waters off Sable Island, a narrow sandbar off the coast of Nova Scotia, infamous for swallowing ships. It started with an accident. Two crewmen, James Courtney and Michael Meehan, were cleaning a cargo tank when fumes overcame them. They passed out. Before anyone could reach them, they suffocated. By the time the ship's medic got to them, it was too late. Following maritime tradition, the men were buried at sea. The captain held a short ceremony. Their bodies weighted and wrapped, slipped into the gray Atlantic. The next day, things got strange. A lookout spotted something in the water alongside the ship. At first, he thought it was debris, but then he saw the faces, two of them, clear as day, floating just beneath the surface, staring up, motionless eyes open. The faces of the dead men. He shouted for the captain. Soon, multiple crew members gathered. They all saw it. Courtney and Meehan's faces, side by side, keeping pace with the ship, never breaking eye contact. Like they were being towed by an invisible rope just beneath the waves. The captain didn't believe in ghosts, but he took a photograph. Actually, he took 6. Only one showed the faces, the others just water. But that one was terrifying. It showed 2 blurred but distinct human faces, one wide-eyed, the other faintly smiling, pressed against the surface of the sea. The photo was later developed in New York and examined by the shipping company. It was even published in a maritime magazine. Sailors across the country whispered about it in bunk rooms and bars. But here's the part no one expected. The faces kept returning. every day for the remainder of the journey, always in the same place, always watching. They didn't drift. They didn't dissolve. They stayed there, just under the starboard bow, tracking the water town like loyal, silent sentries. Even during a storm, when the sea roared and waves broke across the deck, the faces remained visible, unmoving, undisturbed. And when the ship finally reached New York, they vanished, just like that. Some say the captain ordered a priest to bless the hull the moment they docked. Others believe the spirits simply got what they wanted home. Historians debate whether the photo is real. Some argue it was a double exposure. Others say it's a hoax. But no one has ever definitively debunked it. And that wasn't the last time the area took a ship. The Sable Vortex has a long and unsettling history. Over 350 shipwrecks have been recorded near Sable Island, many under ideal conditions. Magnetic anomalies are common. Compasses go wild. Radios stutter. And sometimes, it's not just wreckage that's found, it's people. A sailor, found in a lifeboat in 1958. No ID, no memory of how he got there. He spoke perfect English, but had no accent anyone could place. He insisted he was from a ship called the Marinora. No such ship existed, or maybe no one wanted to say it did. In 2003, a fishing trawler passed over the area during calm seas. All equipment working fine. Then for exactly 47 seconds, every instrument flatlined. GPS, depth sensors, sonar. Even the battery-operated wristwatches stopped. When they rebooted the system, a single photograph appeared on the onboard digital camera, one no one remembered taking. It showed the ocean surface, two faces in the water. Again, a forensic specialist later reviewed the image, said it matched no crew members. But it matched the Watertown photo. Exactly. The same angle, same expressions, same slight smear on the left side of the frame, like salt rubbed against glass, as if the ocean had remembered and repeated. You stand now on the wind-blown cliffs near Sable Island, your coat snapping in the cold breeze. The sea is calm tonight, too calm. You watch as the moon paints silver streaks across the water's skin, and for a moment you swear you see something move beneath the surface. A flicker, a shape, a face. But you don't lean closer. You know better, because this isn't just a shipwreck. This is something deeper. The Watertown may have gone down. Her crew may have died. But what stayed? What waited? It wasn't just ghosts. It was memory. And the sea, as always, remembers what we try to forget. So if you ever find yourself sailing past Sable Island, and the ocean feels too quiet, and the sky too still, listen carefully. If someone says your name but no one's there, don't answer. And whatever you do, don't look over the side. They say ice preserves everything. Bodies, ships, memories. But preservation isn't the same as peace. Some things stay frozen not to be kept safe, but because they're too dangerous to thaw. And one of those things lies trapped beneath the shifting glaciers of Greenland. Her name was the HMS Erebus. You've probably heard of her twin, the Terror II Royal Navy ships that formed Sir John Franklin's doomed expedition to find the Northwest Passage in 1845. They were the pride of British engineering reinforced for Arctic travel packed with supplies for 3 years. Elegant names for ships meant to conquer the last blank spaces on the map. They vanished entirely. No survivors ever returned. No messages reached the crown. Just rumors from Inuit hunters, stories of starving men, madness, cannibalism, and then nothing. The expedition became one of the greatest mysteries in polar history. But in 2014, almost 170 years later, the Erebus was found. And something about her wasn't right. She lay intact beneath the icy waters near King William Island, preserved like a corpse in a glass coffin. Divers expected wreckage, decay. Instead, they found quiet. Her decks were whole, her hull unnaturally clean, her bell still attached, and inside? Well, no one talks much about the inside. The initial reports said the cabins were pristine, almost staged. Furniture unrotted, papers legible. One bed still made. The temperature inside the wreck was several degrees warmer than surrounding water. Unexplained. One diver, speaking anonymously, said he entered the captain's quarters and saw a lantern flicker. Not his own. Not electrical. An oil lantern glowing red. There was no source, and yet the video from his camera was later found to be corrupted. Just static. His dive partner's camera showed nothing unusual. That diver left the project. He now lives alone in northern Scotland and refuses to speak publicly. Here's what you won't find in the official Parks Canada reports. A sonar reading captured a pulse emanating from the wreck every 42 minutes. Metal recovered from the deck was magnetically charged. A carved symbol, never before recorded, was found scratched repeatedly on the underside of a table in the mess hall. And the most disturbing part, a perfectly preserved handprint inside the fogged glass of the officer's cabin. Not frozen, fresh. Scientists say it's impossible, but there it was. People have speculated for years that Franklin's crew fell to lead poisoning from poorly soldered canned food, or scurvy, or exposure. But if so, why did they leave the ship? The Erebus was safe, warm, stocked. Why did they drag lifeboats across the ice toward nowhere? And why, after nearly 2 centuries, was the Erebus still intact? Some Inuit elders say the ship was cursed, that the white men dug too deep, that they asked the ice questions they were not meant to. They believe the ship chose to return not to be found, but to warn. You can dismiss that if you want, but here's the part no one explains. During the final expedition dive in 2018, a new anomaly was found, a door that hadn't been visible before, buried beneath sediment and frost. It led to a chamber not on the Erebus's original schematics. Inside were no charts, no crew artifacts, just a single item, a compass, old, ornate, and spinning wildly, even when held still. Even when taken away from the wreck, the diver who retrieved it returned to the surface with a nosebleed and a concussion. He claimed he hadn't hit anything. He claimed he heard a voice underwater, singing a lullaby in a language no one recognized. The compass was sealed in a lead-lined box and placed in an off-site research facility. A year later, that facility was damaged in a fire. The compass was missing. Security footage cut out at 2:17 a.m., the same time the joyful spirit had gone silent. Coincidence? You begin to wonder. What if the Erebus didn't just get lost? What if she found something? What if she brought it back? The ocean is vast, but the ice is patient. It keeps secrets longer than any sea. And when it chooses to release one, you'd better ask why. Because some ships return not because they're done drifting, but because they've been sent back as a message. You stand now at the edge of an Arctic outpost, snow crunching under your boots. The wind howls like a voice just beyond hearing. Somewhere out there, under the black water and white ice, she waits, still humming, still warm, still watching. You don't step closer. You don't want to see that lantern. You don't want to hear that song, because you know deep down, if you go inside, you won't come back the same. The Erebus is no longer just a ship. She's a boundary, and something on the other side is knocking. There's a place in the Baltic Sea where compasses twist without warning, where underwater scans return grainy shapes that don't match natural formations, and where even seasoned divers refuse to go down a second time. They call it the Baltic Anomaly, and at the center of it is something not quite a ship, but not quite not a ship either. The story begins in June 2011 when a team of Swedish treasure hunters, Ocean X, was scanning the seabed between Sweden and Finland looking for wrecks. What they found instead was a massive mushroom-shaped structure resting 300 feet below the surface. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen. 60 feet tall with a flat curved top, nearly 200 feet in diameter, and what appeared to be a long stair-like ramp stretching from the seabed to its upper platform. The whole thing looked built, designed, as if it had been placed there. The divers described the surface as stone-like, but oddly smooth, almost metallic in places. Strange ridges, right angles, sections that seemed scorched, blackened by some impossible heat. But here's what really got to them. Their equipment began failing. Cameras shut off. Lights dimmed. Satellite phones died. When they surfaced, everything worked again. Dive after dive, the same thing happened, gear cutting out as they neared the structure, returning to normal at a distance. They brought back samples. Stone, they thought, but laboratory tests said otherwise. One piece showed signs of being fused at extremely high temperatures beyond what's naturally possible at that depth. Another fragment contained manganese levels inconsistent with any known sediment in the area. No volcanic activity nearby, no tectonic instability, and no wrecks reported. In short, there's no reason for it to be there. Skeptics rush to explain it. A glacial deposit, a rock outcrop, an illusion. But even geological experts hesitated. The sonar images were too clean, too deliberate. And then there's the trench. Leading up to the anomaly is a nearly 1,000-foot-long track cut perfectly through the seabed, as if the object had skidded or landed. It ends abruptly, right at the base of the structure. No displacement, no natural erosion, like it stopped itself on purpose. Ocean X released limited images, but the clearest photo? They never released that one publicly. A journalist who saw it leaked the description: a central dome with a ring of evenly spaced depressions around it, like a turbine or a hatch. That's when the theories took off. UFO, secret Nazi base, ancient Atlantean outpost. Pick your poison, but nothing explains what came next. One diver, who insisted on anonymity, claimed he entered a fissure along the side of the structure. Only a few feet wide, just enough to slip through. Inside, he said it wasn't solid stone. It was hollow, a corridor curved with walls that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. He said it was the quietest place he'd ever been. The silence wasn't just absence of sound, it was pressure, like sound had been removed. At the end of the corridor, he claimed was a wall covered in grooves and lines patterns not writing. When he touched them, his flashlight went out. For 12 minutes, he lay in darkness. When the light flicked back, on the grooves were gone. Just blank wall. When he surfaced, his dive computer showed he'd only been under for 4 minutes. His team clocked him at 16. He never dove again, and he refused to be near electrical equipment for months, said it made his teeth hurt. Some believe the anomaly is natural. Others say it's evidence of lost civilizations, sunken remnants of something pre-human. Structures from a time before ice sheets, when coastlines looked different, when someone mapped the seafloor and built beneath it, and then forgot or was buried. There's a chilling possibility that it isn't from the past at all, that it's recent. A crash site, maybe, or worse, a door. Not into something, but out of something. Since the discovery, nearby sonar scans have revealed other shapes, smaller, less defined, but arranged in patterns. Some researchers say it's nothing. Others whisper of a submerged grid of structures too deep to retrieve, too precise to dismiss. And through it all, the same phenomenon recurs. Electronics fail. GPS stutters. Sound is eaten. The Baltic Anomaly doesn't want to be measured. It wants to be left alone. You imagine drifting over it now, deep below your keel, the sea strangely warm despite the latitude, the water dense, heavy, like you're moving through memory. Your instruments go blank, your ears pop, and then, in the static of the sonar, you hear something. Not a ping, not feedback, a voice, faint, far away, repeating a single word. Come. You jerk upright. The screens return to normal. The crew laughs, blames interference, but your hands are shaking. You dream of it that night, not the object, but what's beneath it. You dream of a vast sleeping eye, half open, not curious, hungry. And you understand something you hadn't before. The sea doesn't hide everything because it's secretive. Sometimes it hides things because we're not ready. Because the thing beneath the Baltic, it's not lost, it's waiting. You wake to the creaking of wood and the hiss of water against hull. The air smells of salt old rope and something fainter like parchment long shut in a box. You're not on your modern bed, not in your home. You're aboard something older, slower. A vessel lost to history and memory. You're aboard the Octavius. Her story begins in 1761, a merchant ship, British flagged, built to carry cargo between London and the East Indies. She set sail for China and made her way through the warm southern seas with little incident. Months later, she departed the port of Canton, bound for home. But she never returned. She vanished. No distress reports. No debris. No rumors of pirates. Just one more ship that left port and fell off the map. Until 13 years later, in 1775, a whaling ship named the Herald was sailing off the coast of Greenland when they spotted something eerie, a three-masted schooner, drifting listlessly among the icebergs. No sails, no movement. The crew of the Herald approached, called out. No answer. They boarded her and found the Octavius. The ship was intact. No visible damage. Her deck covered in snow sails, frozen stiff rigging tangled in icicles. Below deck, the real horror awaited. The entire crew was still aboard, frozen. The boarding party found bodies in bunks' arms folded as if still dreaming. A cook slumped beside a stove that hadn't been lit in over a decade. Two sailors locked in a game of dice mid-roll. One man sat at a writing desk, quill in hand, pen, poised above the page. The captain. In his cabin, a woman and a small boy were curled in the corner, wrapped in blankets. All of them frozen, perfectly preserved in the dry Arctic air. But it was the logbook that chilled the Herald's crew more than any frozen corpse. The last entry was dated November 11th, 1762, nearly 13 years before. And the coordinates? They placed the Octavius somewhere north of Alaska, thousands of miles from where she was found. That meant something unthinkable. She had tried to cross the Northwest Passage. At the time, it was considered suicide. The route was largely unmapped, full of shifting ice dead ends, crushing cold. No European ship had ever completed it, and yet the Octavius had tried. Somehow, impossibly, she'd made it most of the way through, only to get trapped in pack ice and carried dead and drifting across the Arctic until found again off Greenland. A floating tomb. The Herald crew, spooked beyond belief, took the logbook and left everything else. They didn't dare tow her. They didn't even strip her for wood. They left the Octavius to the ice, and no one ever saw her again. No wreck, no reports, just that one encounter, and a story that spread like fire through sailor bars and cold docksides, from Plymouth to Reykjavik. Many dismissed it as a sea tale, an exaggeration, a hallucination caused by snow-blind eyes and too much rum, but something about the details made it stick. How many ghost stories include coordinates? And why were there never any contradictions in the retellings? Sailors spoke of her for years. They claimed to see her ghost pale sails barely visible through the mist, drifting silently past the icebergs near Baffin Bay. Always in winter. Always when the wind stopped. Some said the Octavius was cursed, that the captain had made a pact to be the first to complete the passage no matter the cost, and that when the crew froze, the ship kept going, dragged by something else, by will. There are more disturbing variations, that the captain never froze, that he wrote in the logbook for weeks after the others had died. His body somehow untouched his thoughts, becoming less coherent as the days passed, that his final entries weren't coordinates or weather reports, but prayers and drawings. One sketch shows a star map, but the stars are wrong. Another shows a doorway under the ice, carved in symbols that don't match any known language. The last page, empty, except for a single phrase scrawled in a frantic hand. We knocked, and it answered. No one knows where that logbook is now. Some say it was lost in a fire. Others claim it's kept in a private collection hidden from public view. But the legend endures, and occasionally something surfaces. In 1892, an American fishing trawler reported sighting a derelict with blackened wood and pale sails drifting far north of known shipping lanes. They dared not board. But through a spyglass, the captain saw a nameplate. Octavius. In 1931, a Soviet Arctic expedition claimed to have picked up strange radio signals from an unregistered vessel broadcasting weather reports in 18th century naval code. The transmission lasted 6 minutes, then silence. In 2008, a Canadian icebreaker found a narrow channel of melted sea ice near Ellesmere Island. Unexplained. Sonar picked up a faint echo beneath the surface, a shape consistent with an 18th century schooner. They returned the next day. It was gone. And always, when the Octavius is spoken of, people say the same thing. She's still trying, still drifting, still trapped in an endless loop halfway between death and destination. Not at rest, not wrecked, just moving, like an echo of determination that outlived the hands that steered it. You stand now on the edge of a frozen inlet, ice cracking beneath your boots. The wind has stopped. The stars above are sharp, unnaturally bright, and in the distance, you hear it. Wood groaning, canvas flapping, and the creak of a wheel turning without a hand. You don't follow, because you know what the Octavius is. Not a ghost ship, a question, a test, and once you step aboard, you'll never stop sailing. You'll become part of the voyage. The Mediterranean has a way of disguising danger. Sunlight dances on its surface, and its waters roll lazily along golden shores. But under that beauty, history churns layered in shipwrecks, bones, and lost cities. And one ship in particular has earned a quiet, reverent place among the strangest, the SS Urania. She was small, by modern standards, a Greek passenger ferry in the 1930s making short island hops between Crete and the Peloponnese. Reliable, unassuming. She ran daily routes, ferrying villagers, tourists, and cargo across waters that had been sailed for thousands of years. Then in 1939, she disappeared. She left port from Chania in the early morning. Calm seas, 32 people aboard. Destination Kalamata. A short journey. She never arrived. No storm had passed. No Essos. No wreckage was found. No oil slick. Just empty water. War was breaking out across Europe, and her disappearance was eventually swallowed by headlines of tanks and treaties. Another casualty. Another mystery, forgotten by all but the families waiting at docks that would never see their loved ones return. But 20 years later, the Urania came back. In 1959, a Norwegian oil exploration team in the Ionian Sea spotted something on sonar, large metallic, shaped like a ship. When they sent down divers, they expected an old cargo wreck. What they found was the Urania, intact, upright, in waters over 2,000 feet deep, which made no sense, because the Urania wasn't rated for deep-sea travel. Her hull would have crumpled like a tin can. Her engine couldn't have carried her that far west, and yet there she was, perfectly preserved down to the paint on her nameplate. Even stranger, the interior was dry. That's what the divers claimed. Inside the bridge, the papers hadn't rotted. A coat still hung on a hook. A teacup sat upright on the control panel. The captain's log, open to the final page, read, "We passed the light again. It should not be there. No bodies, no signs of panic, no water damage." It was as if the Urania had never been underwater at all. The discovery was hushed. No official reports. The ship was left untouched at the ocean floor location, undisclosed. But divers talk. And soon more stories emerged from fishermen in the 1970s who claimed to see a white ferry out at sea lights on smoke from the stacks, but when they approached it, vanished into mist. From amateur radio operators in Sicily who late at night picked up static-filled transmissions in outdated Greek naval code, repeating a date over and over, September 3rd, 1939. The day the Urania vanished. One man swore he heard a woman's voice on the frequency whispering in English, "We are sailing through the same moment." Then silence. There are theories, of course. Some say the ship was caught in a whirlpool, an underwater anomaly that displaced her. Others propose she hit a methane vent, lifting her and relocating her in an unprecedented event. But none of those explain the lack of damage, the dry cabins, the fresh ink in the captain's log. And then there's the lighthouse, that final entry. "We passed the light again." Sailors from multiple countries have reported seeing a strange lighthouse at sea, usually near the same coordinates just before they experience instrument failure. No one can locate it on maps. It doesn't appear in any registry, but the descriptions are always identical. A tall stone tower with black glass windows glowing faintly blue, turning slowly even when there's no wind. It appears once, then never again. Some claim it's not a lighthouse at all. It's a marker or a doorway. In 1984, a French research sub passed near the Urania's wreck while surveying the seafloor. As they approached, their depth gauge dropped rapidly. Lights flickered. And then, for 17 minutes, they were gone from sonar. When they resurfaced, they reported nothing unusual until the crew realized their watches no longer matched. 17 minutes missing. Exactly. One of the crew later resigned, stating that during the blackout, he saw another ship alongside them, out the small porthole. It was a ferry, white hull, no markings. Inside the bridge, he swore someone was waving, smiling, and not human. Since then, no further expeditions to the Urania have been approved. Not officially. But the story continues. From time to time, a passenger ferry in the region will go off course, if only slightly. GPS drifts. Compasses wobble. One captain reported sailing for 30 minutes past an island that should have taken 5. When he checked the logs later, he found a handwritten note tucked between pages on paper he didn't recognize. It said, "Still aboard. Still watching the light." No one admits to writing it. And the ink was over 50 years old. You look now out across the Ionian waters. They glisten inviting. Tourists laugh behind you, snapping photos boarding modern ferries. But you stay still. Because in the distance, you swear you see something. A pale shape, a stack, a window flickering. The Urania, maybe, still sailing, still circling that impossible lighthouse. And if you ever see her, don't follow. Because she's not trying to dock. She's trying to take you with her. You've heard stories of ships lost at sea, of vanished crews and drifting hulls. But this one, this last one, doesn't start on the water. It starts in a warehouse. In 2002, a shipping container arrived at the port of Los Angeles. It wasn't on the manifest. No one signed for it. No paperwork. Just a rusted steel box, aged beyond its supposed manufacturing date, with no origin port and no listed destination. Customs officers were used to strange things, illicit goods, mislabeled crates, even the occasional stowaway. But this was different. The container had no identifying marks. Its serial number returned no matches. The padlock securing it had been corroded shut from the inside. When they cut it open, they expected contraband. Instead, they found a room. A single narrow hallway, wood-paneled, lit by flickering sconces gently swaying. As if they'd opened the door not to a container, but to a ship. The air was cold and wet. Salt clung to everything. Salt on the walls. Salt on the faded carpet. Salt staining the broken chandelier that hung from the ceiling like a rotting tooth. Inside, there were signs of life. A half-smoked pipe resting on a shelf. A logbook with a single sentence repeated over and over, "We are still en route." And most disturbing of all, a mirror, cracked old its frame, etched with barnacles. But when the customs officer looked into it, he didn't see himself. He saw water, pitch-black endless water, and a deck behind him that wasn't there. He looked away, but in the corner of his eye, the reflection lingered. They sealed the container again. Within the hour, 2 men in unmarked suits arrived. They said it was a decommissioned film prop, that it was unsafe, that it had already been claimed. The container was removed that night. No paperwork, no explanation. And then just like the Urania, it vanished. But the story didn't end there. Within a month, similar containers began appearing in other ports. Rotterdam, Singapore, Valparaiso, all identical, all unlisted, and inside, variations of the same impossible space. Sometimes a ballroom, sometimes a corridor, sometimes a stairwell leading down into darkness that no flashlight could penetrate. Each time, the decor matched no known ship. Each time, the air smelled of salt and copper. Each time, someone heard it, a horn, far away, calling. The locations changed, but the details didn't. One customs officer in Spain described hearing footsteps behind him, steady, slow, and wet. Another, in Japan, refused to open the door. Said the container hummed. And in every case, the shipping logbook was found identical in all containers. Same cover, same ink, same scrawl. "We are still en route." It wasn't long before theories exploded. Some thought it was an art project, a viral marketing stunt, a prank taken too far. But then someone did a background trace on the shipping code etched faintly into the original container's interior. It matched a ship last registered in 1899, the SS Antigone, a transatlantic steamliner that went missing in the Sargasso Sea, reported lost in 1901. No wreck ever found, no survivors, and according to archived passenger manifests, she was carrying a very specific cargo on her final voyage: antique mirrors salvaged from the ruins of an old manor house in coastal France. A manor said to be built atop a pre-Roman ritual site. You can scoff. You can say it's coincidence, but that doesn't explain the dreams. Because the people who opened those containers, they started seeing the same thing at night. A hallway that rocks gently. Footsteps down a passage of teak and velvet. The sound of water dripping behind closed doors. And always a whisper in the dark. You are aboard. Some dreamt of dining rooms lit by candelabra, where guests sat in silence, unmoving skin, pale as wax wine glasses filled with seawater. Others dreamt of engine rooms, where the boilers pulsed like beating hearts, glowing with a dull red light that seemed to breathe. And one man, he never woke up. His last words written in a spiral in his journal: still en route, still en route, still en route. We never left. The containers were quietly pulled from circulation, but some slipped through. A warehouse worker in Tacoma disappeared after entering one. A salvage diver in Portugal claimed to find a container floating miles offshore, its door sealed, though no vessel had passed through in weeks. And somewhere, in a forgotten freight yard in Siberia, satellite imagery revealed a row of rusted steel boxes, perfectly aligned, untouched by snow. Some say the SS Antigone never really sank, that she moved, shifted, split, that she became something else, part vessel, part idea, a ship no longer on the sea, but within it, a liminal object, a loop, a door that opens in any place it's needed to anyone ready to answer. And if that's true, if she's still en route, then maybe she's not lost. Maybe she's collecting, adding to her crew, one container at a time. You look now toward the horizon. A freighter slides past, lights blinking. It's not marked, no flag, no name on her hull. She glides too quietly. And for a moment, in the darkened window beside you, you see not your reflection, but a long, narrow hallway, a mirror swinging on the wall, and behind it, something moving, something wet. You blink, it's gone. But somewhere, the Antigone sails on, still en route, always en route, and maybe, just maybe, you're next. So now, here you are, blinking gently in the hush of midnight eyes, fluttering toward sleep, as the last echoes of forgotten voices and creaking hulls fade into the dark. You've drifted with ghost ships across icy Arctic waters and humid jungle rivers. You've stood on mist-covered docks, heard whispers in the deep, and watched pale masts vanish beyond the horizon. You've survived lighthouses that shouldn't exist, doors beneath the waves that were never meant to open, and ships owe the ships that refused to die, a floating hospital with no name, a galleon swallowed by sand, a vessel frozen in time with its crew locked in final poses staring up at you like they've been waiting for anyone to understand. You've traveled alongside the Joyita, the Octavius, the Urang Madan, the Erebus, and a dozen others no history book ever dared to document. You've wandered the corridors of a cargo ship that appeared inside a steel container and stepped onto the deck of a ferry that no longer knows what year it is. And always, always, there was that lingering feeling, that hum in your chest, that breath on the back of your neck, that sense that you weren't alone, that maybe something came with you. But don't worry now. The ocean is quiet. The voices have stopped. The anchors are down. The sails are furled. You made it through 30 haunted crossings, and none of them took you. That's something to be proud of. You stayed curious. You kept listening. You looked into the fog and didn't flinch. And now finally you can rest. So go ahead. Let your breath slow. Let the waves in your mind flatten out. Let the ship sail on without you. They've got miles to go, and you've heard enough for one night. Good night, sailor. Sleep well.